Hello, viewers. How are you all doing this evening? I hope we are doing well. We are here at the No Justice stream, where my... There we go, my alert box actually showed up now. How are we all doing? I hope we're doing well. It is a very, very interesting time in the UK today. Got plenty to talk about, plenty to go over, plenty to have a look at. Let me just get my settings correct. Was trying to stream live to Twitter today, but I couldn't get the stream key to work because I don't know how. I'm not good with technology. I should theoretically be good with technology, but today I just couldn't get it to work, unfortunately. I hope you are all doing well. Everybody out there who's watching. Let me see if I can grab Ricky and have a chat. Let me try and see if I can get this to work. Hope you're having a good day there, Mr. Willis. It's been good to have you in the stream so far. Do you have any idea how to get streams working on Twitch? I had not a bloody clue, unfortunately, what I was doing when I was trying to get it sorted. Let me zoom in this camera a little bit. It's a little bit far out. Well, that zoomed in very far. Right, that'll do. That's a good distance. I like that. True. Every day under capitalism is always miserable, but we try. We get on. We get through it. What made your day particularly crap? Let me just get what I'm sorted out here. Just mute that. Would not like to have multiple sounds on here. Ba, 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 ba. My settings are for voice and video aren't correct on Discord. Right microphone, right output device. Can you hear me okay, Ricky? Yes, I can hear you absolutely fine, perfectly. How are you doing this evening? Are you doing alright?
I speak in?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear. Yes, you're really loud. 2 seconds, I'll turn the volume down.
Yeah, let me move a little further away from the microphone. I was close to clipping on my end, so I just wanted to triple check. Let me add a source on here.
Cool.
Window capture. And you are here.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been an interesting day, hasn't it, Ricky?
Yeah, all over the place. Are we live yet?
Yeah, we're live at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure there. Did you get us sorted out on Twitter, or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, if you could do it, that'd be great. I had no idea. I was copying in the stream key and the URL into my Streamlabs OBS, and it just wasn't having any of it. It's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, we'll probably just have to figure it out later. Obviously, we don't have time to do it now. But yeah, I think we should be live on Twitter now, hopefully.
Perfect.
If not, we'll just have to sack that idea for tonight.
I mean, definitely something we can obviously look into later on, regardless. So
Yeah.
it's not too bad. Not too bad. What
Well, I was trying.
Yeah. Sorry.
I was trying. Sorry, I was trying it yesterday and I accidentally streamed myself live and I was supposed to keep it private, so the entire world could see me. But yeah, we're live now. We're up. Okay, you ready to go?
Yeah, I did notice your little test stream that came up on Twitter. So
Oh my god, it was a nightmare. Yeah, that was not supposed to happen. But
that's
yeah,
right. As
we are
long as you
live
know that
now.
it works on your end, that's the important bit,
Yes,
right?
I know. It was up for about a minute, but God knows how many people saw it. But yeah, okay then.
Not a problem, not a problem. So, the news today is that MP Owen Paterson, who is a Somerset MP, who was essentially he's a lobbyist for a particular company, I forget the name of it right now, was essentially paid hundreds of thousands of pounds as a lobbyist for this company, and they mysteriously managed to get hold of a very, very lucrative COVID contract during the pandemic, which was I think it was a £7 million contract, wasn't it? I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. And then this was the manner in which he engaged in this was breaking parliamentary lobbying rules. So much so that the independent body that oversees these things issued him a 30-day suspension, which then went to a vote in the Commons, which the Tories voted to deliberately overturn the suspension and also to tear up the particular the particular body that was in place to be able to oversee these instances of breaking parliamentary standards, which then obviously massive outcry. Everyone in the media, everyone on social media kicks up a fuss, drives this obvious rampant corruption, which is clearly what is essentially modus operandi for the Conservatives now, has been ever since the start of the pandemic, ever since since obviously it was the Green Sill scandal as well, so it's clearly par for the course at this point. But for this one, in this particular moment, because it had come up as parliamentary standards and because of the suspension, this one was clearly public knowledge. And then what's happened is, as today has progressed and as the story has broken, as people have kicked up a fuss about it on social media, what has then happened is they've then gone back on it because Labour boycotted the idea of the new committee that they were going to be putting up to be able to deal with this because they realised that it was essentially just a sham, that there was no point in even engaging with it because it was so insular and parasitic and rotten to the core at that point. Which then led to them scrapping the idea and then adhering to the suspension, and then now he's quit because he realises that he doesn't want to be in the cruel world of politics. I mean, he has his money now, so he's probably pretty happy with what he's left off with, which is a reasonable summary of the events of today. What's your take on it from so far, Ricky?
Okay. Well, there's a lot that we can cover here.
True.
Right.
Very true. Very true.
What I would say is basically the absurdity of all of this is yesterday, Owen Paterson was essentially a member of the jury in his own corruption trial. So you can imagine the scene. The judge is saying, has the jury reached a verdict yet? Yes, I have, Your Honour. I find myself not guilty. That's literally what took place. And it's so blatantly violated the principles of natural justice. But the Tories don't give a damn about that. They're trying to create voter fatigue. They keep pushing to see what the media and the public will let them get away with. And it turns out that's quite a lot, actually. And if ever they go too far, they just walk it back, knowing the public will let them get away with less obvious offences next time because people will be too drained to fight back or too worn out to even notice. It will just be accepted that this is how politics is done. They're all the same. Yeah, the system stinks, but there's nothing we can do about it. When you have that level of apathy, whatever you have, you don't have a true democracy. But as broken as our system is, we are clearly not as powerless as we often feel. If we raise our voices loud enough, we can still make an impact, as we have done in this case. A cynical person might suggest this kind of thing's exactly why the government wants to regulate social media so badly. They've heard the public outcry, and they were forced to act.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right in that it is just... essentially, they play this. You know how when somebody tells like a really near the knuckle joke in the pub, right? and then they will say whether they or something, or they make like a really kind of controversial statement when you're just chatting with somebody, and then they will gauge they'll gauge whether they were being serious or not based upon their reaction. And then they essentially, it's just Schrodinger's asshole, right? It's essentially what the Tories are doing, where they will propose a particular policy or propose a particular piece of legislation, and then essentially either it slips under the radar completely unnoticed by anybody who's not politically savvy, or alternatively it will come and turn into a big public outcry, and then they'll just walk it back. So they essentially continually pushing the bounds of what isn't acceptable within political discourse and within political policy making. And then as soon as something comes up that they feel like paints them in a bad light, they can then walk it back. But the issue that I have at this point is that we've essentially got another Hancock moment where someone has made an incredibly large fuck up, essentially, which has shown the Tories for what they are and essentially stripped them bare in their own light so that everyone can see how completely corrupt and completely cynical they are. And they've essentially used him as a scapegoat. They've become the fall guy. So if he's resigned, he's gone away. Well, we can wash our hands of this now. We don't have to care about this now that he's resigned. Which is essentially what happened with Matt Hancock during his scandal, where they essentially used him as a scapegoat, put all the blame on him, and then we concentrate on these individual figures and these individual acts of corruption or these individual acts of negligence, rather than looking at the larger picture, which is that this is an endemic issue with regards to Conservative Party policy.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that, and it's incredibly frustrating because it's literally it's the exact opposite way of what you would want your government to do politics. They're supposed to obviously lead us with integrity and be doing the right thing and everything else, and they're literally doing the complete reverse. They're doing the worst possible thing they can get away with in any circumstance, and just seeing, as you said, how far they can push it. Just look at it this way: an MP can take what is essentially £500,000 bribe, and he can escape any meaningful punishment because he's not really been punished, let's be honest. A nurse can't even accept more than, say, a box of chocolates or some flowers because that would be seen as a conflict of interest. That's how broken our political system is. We have this enormous amount of money in politics, but in pretty much any job. I used to work in a bank, for example. We weren't allowed to accept gifts. And you've got Boris Johnson just like accepting holidays, and all these other politicians flying off around the world on these ridiculously expensive holidays that have just been given to them. We're not allowed to accept anything like that when we work in normal jobs, but they can't accept it. And then what is bizarre to me is how they kind of feel like they're the victims in all of this when they get called out for it. And this is the kind of thing when they talk about Twitter pylons, this is what they mean. They mean us calling this kind of bullshit out. Owen Paterson, he may have been found guilty, but even the original punishment was incredibly lame. A 30-day suspension from Parliament was nothing. And let's not forget, his resignation was voluntary. That can't reasonably be called a punishment. He's had the audacity to portray himself as a victim. I don't know if you saw his speech, but it was just like, I'm not going to go into it because he tried to emotionally manipulate people. I'm not going to say too much more than that, but he tried to blame MPs and the public for unfairly forcing him out of a job as far as he saw it. If we had a functioning democracy, he would probably be going to jail. This is what an all-party committee said of Paterson's conduct. No previous case of paid advocacy has seen so many breaches or such a clear pattern of behaviour in failing to separate private and public interests. And yet the man insisted he did nothing wrong and would do it all again. I was reading a tweet from Low Key earlier, which I thought was really interesting. I've not had time to check it, but I'm going to take his word. And he says, Owen Paterson was employed by those companies and pushed their interests. This is someone who literally used his time as Environment Secretary to push for fracking. This is a norm in our political system, but the companies are their constituents, not us. So he's pushing for fracking. Now, if you're pushing for fracking, you are not representing the people of this country. No ordinary person wants their MP to be pushing for fracking. The only people that do it are the people who are going to profit from us. And if he's taking money from those people, regardless of whether he thinks he's doing anything wrong or not, regardless of whether he's taking direct instruction, it is very clear that that is an incredible conflict of interest, should not be even close to being legal, and they should not have second jobs, let alone be taking what look like bribes. But let's just, for a moment, let's just give Owen Paterson the benefit of the doubt. If he really wasn't lobbying and really was doing legitimate work for these companies, surely they will be keeping him on to do a few hours a week for £112,000 a year, right? Does anybody seriously think that's going to happen?
Absolutely not. No, and you're absolutely right. The actual punishment that was meted out in the original inquiry was completely ludicrous. Like a 30-day suspension or a 30-day holiday, basically, for somebody who gets paid 80k a year to sit around and then sometimes vote on bills in Parliament, and then also gets paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to be able to lobby in favour of huge corporate interests that are completely opposite to the general interests of the public at large. The people who we pay his bills as an MP. He's there to serve our interests, and he's clearly with a huge, as you mentioned, clearly a huge conflict of interest here, which again, it's just again shows us all that how much our democracy in the UK, again in a bourgeois democracy that we live in, it completely falls apart because of capital interests being routinely preferred and prioritised over the interests of the actual people who have to live in the country and who have to deal with the effects of the policies that get put into place. The fact that something so brazenly corrupt can essentially be given such a tiny punishment of 30-day suspension, I find completely ludicrous. Like, I mean, at least I'm glad he's gone. I'm glad he's decided to resign. Although it is unfortunate that he did it of his own volition. But I mean, he said it was through his own volition. Whether or not some Tory spin doctor down at number 10 has pushed him to resign, said, well, if you take the fall, we can save the mothership, right? Because then if we play this individual game where it's just like an individual Owen Paterson problem, rather than the bigger picture of the failures of liberal democracies in general under capitalism, then we get to compartmentalize the lobbying issue, compartmentalize the opposing interests of the capitalist class who pay his bills, and the working class who have to live within the system, that gets legislated under these contradictory pressures, right? So we need to focus on the larger picture here rather than just think of it as an individual Owen Paterson issue, if you get my drift.
Yeah. I mean, let's get real here. What this was is an attempt to tear up one of the most important sets of checks and balances in our system. If this had just taken place in a Latin American country, the right and the centre would be demanding regime change. It's corruption, plain and simple. Britain loves to pretend it is one of the least corrupt nations on earth. Anyone who knows anything about what's going on knows that's bullshit. So often we enable corrupt practices while pretending it's not actually corruption at all. It's just the way things are done. It's just politics. The loopholes are not there by accident. The corporations are not giving big money to parties because they're really nice. There is always a transaction. They are getting something in return. Corporations own both of our main parties. We fight wars at the behest of these corporations. We basically do their bidding. And if you're getting paid £80,000 a year as an MP and £112,000 a year as a lobbyist, it's not your constituents you're representing. It's a corporation, the ones who are giving you the most money. That just goes without saying. So what we really need people to understand is this kind of corruption. It's not just some small isolated thing. It's actually central to everything. This is how our system works. Owen Paterson may have been caught out, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. When you look at other countries that are no richer than us and they have better services and the workers get a fairer deal and they don't have the same problems with inequality, etc., it's because rich people don't want us to have a fairer society. We have a rigged economy in which rich people buy themselves ever more power and influence to the point they're almost untouchable, or at least that's their goal. And thankfully, in this case, we have seen a bit of a public backlash, but they backtracked only to create the illusion of democracy, not because they actually give a shit about democratic values. If they did, they wouldn't have done this in the first place. And the Prime Minister certainly would not have whipped his MPs to ensure this bill passed in Parliament. MPs normally get a free vote on this kind of thing, so I think it's fair to say it absolutely went against parliamentary norms in terms of how they've handled this entire mess. I've heard that the MPs received lots of emails, far more than they normally would, and not from the usual suspects, and that gave them a bit of a dilemma, because although they are clearly afraid of Boris Johnson after he removed the whip from the likes of Nicholas Soames, they are also afraid of their reputations being irreparably damaged. I think a lot of MPs realised they massively miscalculated this one, and what they've done since, it's about reputation management. It's not about anything more than that. They've not suddenly found their moral compass.
You're absolutely right, although it does speak to the level to which this has just been too heinous for some people, that even the Tories, who are just known, they've been, apart from with the Brexit issues and the votes that happened around the Brexit era stuff, they are known full well as just obeying the whip half the time. They always stay in line And they always, because they always, again, they try and save the mothership, right? They always go around, so, well, as long as we can wash our hands of it later and maintain power, that's all we really actually care about at the end of the day. So the fact that there are like a handful of Tory MPs who didn't show up or rebelled on this issue, it just stands to like the level to which this is just completely unacceptable. And we talk about how like it's such a massive failure of democracy. Like, we have no democracy at this point. Like, we all saw. I mean, I always talk about this on Socialist Chat Room whenever these kind of subjects come up, about the way in which media manipulation went into the 2017 and 2019 elections, because anything that threatens the power of capital immediately gets pushed to the sides. It gets demonized within the media apparatus, and anything that is in favour of the interests of capital gets a brown envelope to be able to get put into parliamentary policy. So we just don't live in a functioning democracy at this point anymore. We haven't for quite a long time, especially not since 2017. It's difficult to live in a functioning democracy when politicians aren't held to account, and when the media apparatus exists to be able to protect the interests of capital against working class people and the general population, the population in general.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people tweeting on Twitter today and basically saying what it essentially is an oligarchy. It's just, it's a bunch of rich people in charge. What we are actually seeing is fascism creeping in broad daylight. They're testing the waters, looking for weaknesses in our system and seeing what they can get away with. There was a great quote from Aldous Huxley. I don't have the quote to hand, but it was basically about how the fascism of the future will be more subtle and refined to the point people don't even notice it's there. Just because you don't have death camps and just because you get to walk into a voting booth doesn't mean that you don't have a fascist in charge. Fascism is essentially the merger of state and corporate power. It's when the establishment is ensuring it always remains in charge, does whatever it needs to do to remain in charge, whether that be changing corruption rules, removing the power of judicial oversight, lying to the Queen, or proroguing Parliament, gerrymandering constituency boundaries, purging social media, infiltrating and overtaking the opposition, so we only have the illusion of pluralism. Again and again, these people show us they just don't give a shit about ordinary people. They give a shit only about themselves.
You're absolutely right. Again, it's a very kind of I think Gramsci kind of talked about kind of the hegemonic power of capitalism and the way in which it seeks to defend itself. And it also comes down to I forget. This is a quote that's misattributed to Lenin, but it's not actually a Lenin quote. In that fascism is capitalism in decay, because as obviously you look at tendency of rate of profit to fall, and over time capitalism always tends towards instability and uncertainty, as we've seen over the past 20 years, all the recession, etc., credit crunch, post that. We've all seen the kind of the strings of capitalism coming frayed at the ends, and they have to use fascist tactics to maintain power. I was having a good chat with my friend last night, really. We were talking about the way authoritarianism seeps in, and a lot of the time, authoritarianism doesn't even seep in any kind. It's not half the time. It's not even deliberate. It's just people desperate for power, wanting to use any kind of method to be able to cling on to it in the face of insurmounting odds. People's livelihoods are getting much worse. The cost of living is increasing. We're seeing the rates at which the previous economic paradigms of the way that we would live our lives, where you can work a job and then buy a house and have kids, that doesn't happen anymore. You can't survive you can't raise a family on a single income anymore. Like, someone talked to I'm like 21k a year. I was like, well, I can just about take care of myself and my own personal needs. Imagine if I had kids. Imagine if I had a partner to support. I wouldn't be able to do that on the wage that I earn at the moment. These living standards have clearly deteriorated so far, and kids growing up now are only just realising it. Why do you think socialism is so popular in the wake of such market failure amongst young people at the moment, when they look back at what their parents had and what this generation has now, when they realise that, with like millennials, the first generation, to be worse off than the previous generation before them. And they understand that. They know that there's going to be uncertainty, there's going to be civil unrest, there's going to be, levels to which people are agitating for pretty stark and pretty radical political change, and they have to be able to use methods to be able to maintain the power of capital in the wake of that. And as you said, it's very clear that fascist tendencies are seeping in, because again, fascism being capitalism in decay, which it is right now, because it's not sustaining itself in the way that it has done previously, especially not since the neoliberal reforms of Thatcher in the 80s, taking away the social democratic consensus, which gave working people at least somewhat of a leg up until it all became individualised and neoliberalised after the Thatcher and Reagan administrations of the 80s.
Yeah, I just think, you get with a lot of older people that kind of they don't understand why there is such an incredible generational divide because they're living so comfortably and they don't understand they're living comfortably off us. So when they're telling us, oh, you're lazy, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and everything else, they don't understand who is paying their pensions and when they're landlords and whatever, who do they think's actually paying the mortgage of their buy-to-let properties? It's us. They're living off us. When they're telling them it's their hard work because they've been brainwashed by Thatcherism. They don't understand that what they've actually done is they've created a system where they've completely disempowered us, they've just screwed us over and are essentially leeching off us. And of course, there's going to be a huge backlash. Of course, you can get people are not going to suddenly turn to conservatism now. This is one thing, it makes me laugh when people always just kind of say, oh, as people get older, they always become more conservative. This generation's not going to become more conservative unless it's actually got capital. It doesn't have any kind of stake in society because we're not allowed to. So unless something drastically changes, our generation is not going to start switching towards conservatism. Now, if we get back to what we were talking about before, because we're kind of drifting a little bit off topic.
We did, didn't we? Yeah.
What I did want to mention, because I think there's some really important points to get in here. The Tories actually wanted to replace the Standards Commission with one that has a Tory majority, so they can always find themselves not guilty. Kwasi Kwarteng said it's difficult to see a future for Catherine Stone. She's the independent parliamentary commissioner for standards, so she's the one who caught a politician red-handed, and yet she is the one who is apparently going to get punished. And I also think it's really important to note that she was actually going to go after Boris Johnson next, so clearly she had to go. I mean, we can't have the Prime Minister being investigated for corruption, can we?
No, quite. You're absolutely right, and they clearly had kind of closed ranks around him. It's clearly it's all this big plan to be able to essentially alleviate Boris Johnson of having to deal with any consequences for any of the actions that he's partaken in for the last couple of years that he's been in power. So I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Kwasi Kwarteng. He's just had an absolute nightmare running around all the news media organisations, essentially it's become another fall guy at this point. Remember when during the pandemic they were just anytime anything went wrong, they just wheel out Matt Hancock just to essentially breeze over any issues people were having and just bombard us with all of these like clearly well rehearsed talking points. And clearly, since Hancock's out the picture now, they've got Kwasi Kwarteng in to be the next fall guy for Boris by saying because clearly there's been this huge, massive public outcry, and he's trying to reframe the narrative. It doesn't really matter if he becomes the enemy anymore. If people dislike him for the brazen way in which he's glossing over people's concerns within the media, because that's his job now. That's his job, is just to be able to take the blame and to be able to take the ire and take all the flack and divert it away from the people who actually maintain the power within the Conservative Party at this point, which is Boris Johnson, Priti Patel, and Dominic Raab and people like that. So it's very frustrating to have to see the way in which it's impossible to hold the people at the top under account, especially when the media won't do it either. The media won't play hardball with these particular people who they wheel out either. I mean, we get to this kind of during the pandemic we got this kind of surreal nadir where the only person who seemed to be holding Matt Hancock to account in interviews was Piers fucking Morgan. Like, how low do we have to go where Piers Morgan is the fucking voice of reason? I mean, it's very frustrating, and it's absolutely ridiculous that the person who is taking flack at this point in time is the leader of the Parliamentary Standards Commission and not the people actually breaking the standards in the first place. It's completely ludicrous.
It would be ludicrous in any other situation, but it's politics is norm. And I tell you what really kind of amused me was if you saw Boris Johnson the other day when he got the interview with the American journalist, and she is actually a proper journalist. She showed how journalism should be done, and she tore him to shreds. And the look of horror on his face when he actually had to ask difficult questions, because he just does not get that. If that was Laura Kuenssberg, she'd be telling him what a great job he was doing. I mean, it's
so true.
It's just. And, you talk about Matt Hancock, Kwasi Kwarteng, and how they just, they're basically they're kind of volunteering themselves to be basically Boris Boris Johnson's or the media's punch bag. They're just kind of being sent out there to be humiliated in front of the nation week after week. I don't actually understand why they're putting themselves through this. I mean, what are they getting out of it? What are they getting in return? I don't get it. These, you know, these politicians, they're destroying their own reputations. The only reason they've still got a lead in the polls is because the Labour Party is so unbelievably fucking awful and is basically not opposing. And I can't see where, I don't know. I just can't see where they think they're going with it. It's kind of like, yeah, it's this weird situation where you've got both political parties now both think they're going to win the next general election by default. So the Tories think they're going to win because Labour's so awful. Labour think they're going to win because the Tories are so awful. And what we're creating is this incredible amount of apathy. I think there's going to be probably the worst turnout in the history of this country at the next general election because people are just going to be so unbelievably uninspired by the options on offer, and it really makes me despair. It's one of the reasons why I've been calling again and again for a new party. I think we're living in such an unprecedented time now that I kind of don't see any other way forward. I can't see any way forward through the Labour Party. There's clearly, obviously, the Tories are never going to represent the working class, and we've never. I don't think we've had a situation where people have felt this fed up with politics as they do now. I think there's never going to be a better option to actually start something new. If you have an anti-establishment party now, calling out this corruption really strongly, saying, what, we're going to utterly reject big money, we're not like the other parties. I think that would resonate with a lot of people. I think, we're fed up, basically. We're fed up with the corruption. I think we deserve something better.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think you make a good point about kind of political fatigue in general. People are just like, it's every single day there's another scandal, and it just kind of washes over people now. They're just like, well, I guess this is just life now. It's been hyper normalized to the point of absurdity when people don't even realize that, this isn't normal. This isn't good. This isn't how, politics should be going in this country. How the institution of democracy should be functioning. Like, people just don't get the idea that this isn't okay. This isn't something that we should be able to tolerate. But the level of opposition to it is so pathetic that we can't even have a good conversation about it with people. That's why I think in general, there was like news stories about the Tories looking at maybe calling an early general election in 2022, and I don't blame them for trying. Like, if low turnouts always tend to favour people on the right, and I think that if they hold an election, no one would care. Not just because neither party is convincing enough to want to make somebody vote for him, but also just because people just don't want to have to engage in politics. Like, we've had a year worth of people having to deal with the pandemic and all that kind of malarkey, and trying to grind through such a miserable period in British history at that point, that trying to engage in any kind of political activism or political engagement at that point is incredibly tiring for people, and I don't blame them. But I just think that at this point we as leftists, we have to engage with people properly and say, we can't let what's happening here make you despair. Let it radicalize you instead. Let it give you, the impetus that you need to be able to want to make a direct change in the world and in the system that we live in. I think a different party would be some way in which we do that. Now, I do have, my only level of concern is that I do believe that we still have power in the unions, and whilst the unions still support the Labour Party, I can still see an argument for supporting them up to a point, being critical of what people like Starmer are engaging in as part of the Labour top brass, but still, because at the end of the day, I think if we're going to have proper activism for working class people, it's going to come through the unions. The unions are going to be the bodies that actually facilitate changes in material conditions for the working class moving forward. And having a party in power that is at the behest of the unions, because that's basically where all the fundings for Labour is coming from now, since they lost all of their actual members post Starmer. So I do feel like there's still we just need to be able to use our voice efficiently to call out the Labour Party for what it is, whilst also being electorally pragmatic in the short term as well. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I'm not sure you can hear me. Can you hear me still? Because my camera's gone down.
Yeah, I can hear you still, just no camera.
All right, I can hear you fine. So I'll just sorry, I was Yeah, I did catch you. I was a little bit distracted, but yeah, I kind of see what you're saying, and I think Carrie Murphy and Jeremy Corbyn have basically been making the same point that anything that does come from the left has to go through the union movement. But they did kind of indicate that that could possibly be in the form of a new party, that the Labour Party does not have a divine right to exist. Now, the way the Labour Party is going at the moment, the Labour Party, they're kind of trying to rig their internal systems just in the same way that the Tories are trying to rig Parliament. They're trying to make it so that the left are utterly powerless. You look how we were trying to raise a leadership threshold to make sure that the Socialist Campaign Group could not put forward a candidate to challenge Starmer, and all this other bullshit that's been going on. So they're actually doing the exact same kind of things that the Tories are doing. They look just as corrupt and just as broken. Whereas, for example, the Ford report, and it just, if that's going to be the future path of the Labour Party, if they're just going to say, you know what, we're going to screw over the membership, we kind of see the membership as being our own enemies, and you know what, we're not representing the working class anymore. We're going to mouth off and say we're the party of the working class, but really we're going to be representing corporate interests, and then after that we're going to represent the middle class, and the working class are going to be right at the bottom of the pile. That's basically what they're doing. And if they rig things in a way that that's going to be the long-term future of the Labour Party, and there is actually no way back into power for the left, then what is even the point of Labour at that stage? The only way that I can see that there is a future for the left in the Labour Party is, one, they do get a new left leader, but that wouldn't be enough because it'd have the entire PLP against them. They would have to get mandatory reselection in. Otherwise, you're just going to have the Jeremy Corbyn situation all over again, where you're just going to have the chicken coop, you're just going to have them constantly undermining. Whenever the media tries to whip up some fake scandal, they're all going to join in against their own party, and we're going to be utterly powerless. So either the left finds a solution to this. I don't know whether they might be able to drive Starmer out by doing something like, I don't know, taking him to court and forcing the release of the Ford report. I don't know whether that would be possible, but that's the kind of thing that they really need to do. They need to try and humiliate him, put as much pressure on him as possible, because I've got little doubt in my mind that whatever's in the Ford report would be absolutely damning. It would be damning of Starmer's allies, might even be damning of him himself. That's the kind of thing that could drive him out. But even then, the left would have an uphill battle, even if they can, a left-wing candidate. Are they going to get mandatory reselection after that? I don't think so. I think what the left would do is, I think that they'd back somebody who was maybe, soft left, somebody a lot closer to the centre. A person like that's not going to represent mandatory reselection. They're going to try and, unify the party, which, that's the kind of thing that's not going to happen. Unifying the party essentially means that the left is silent. So further forward, it's yeah, you might not have a guy as extreme as Starmer in charge, but you're still not going to have somebody that's going to be represented of the left. So unless there's some major change in how the Labour Party operates, I really struggle to see what we can do going forwards for the left to have a voice in this country. And by the left, what we're essentially saying is the working class. We're talking about politics that represent the people that are struggling most in this country, the people that are eating from food banks, etc. What the likes of Keir Starmer are saying is, we're going to be really hard on benefits claimants, for example. Like, fuck you. Where I'm from, almost everybody has claimed benefits at some point. Like, people who are in work are on benefits. It's not just something for the scroungers or the lazy ones. It's something for everyone. People who are full-time working families, they're claiming universal credit. You're going to be hard on us now. Not good enough. Yeah. It's not good enough. We deserve better.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely 100% correct. Like, now, I do think that there's at least some room for a kind of like a left but kind of soft left compromise candidate, someone like Clive Lewis or Angie Burnham, somebody like that, I think could theoretically be a compromise candidate for Labour leader. There we go. That's correctly said, that phrase. But I think you're absolutely right. The fact they wouldn't support mandatory selection is a real tipping point. It's a real kind of point of contention that would be the only way in which we can have, proper left wing, working class, I guess that's really a working class and or socialist representation within the party. And I think you're absolutely right in that regard. And we would have to look at, I think the best thing to look at is kind of targeted third party votes, and looking at it through kind of a pragmatic lens when it comes to election day. When we're doing our campaigning, we can still run through our the third party infrastructure to be able to push for specific socialist goals. I mean, we can see that if you have the correct messaging, you have the correct platform, the correct level of engagement, you can be successful with a third party. I mean, I don't like him. I don't like the Workers' Party GB, but George Galloway in Batley and Spen clearly showed that you don't have to have any kind of like known platform. You have to be a known entity with which to be able to win seats in Parliament, right? And I think we have to be tactical in the way that we do that and strategic, and build power on a local level first. Looking at things like the Preston model that we were I forget the name of the councillor we had in the first socialist chat room. He put some good stuff about. Yeah, exactly. Got some good stuff about the Preston model, and we can this is a blueprint for being able to creating local communities that have working class interests at heart. And I think that if we can press more people at a local level first and build soft power like that, and then we can translate that into larger parliamentary power at a later date. I think it's difficult. I understand the point of view that we could see potential large-scale political sea change in future, but we need to build soft power and local power first, and then build from the bottom up and build essentially a kind of long-form coalition based on working class values and principles and policy, and like enhancing the material conditions of these people. Right, we have to cut through the bullshit of the media culture war and bring it back down to genuine policies that are going to make people's lives better. Like when you look at people like Starmer, who's supposed to for the Party of Labour, supposed to represent like honest to God working people in this country, turn his nose up at £15 minimum wage, getting cucked by the Tories, who immediately a week later do an extra like minimum wage increase. Literally, like there's no difference between the two. I actually think that I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think that the Tories are more likely to nationalise energy companies at this point than Rachel Reeves is, because they understand that market failure that makes them look bad isn't workable with regards to trying to get themselves elected. So if they're going to have to take something into public ownership, like they did with the railways during COVID, where they just said, "Well, we'll just run them at a loss through the public sector during the pandemic, because we don't want the private companies to go bust over the course of having to not be able to deliver the rail services during the pandemic." And then go, well, if loads of people are going to be without energy, we can't win the next election, so let's just do that right now. Whereas Rachel Reeves just seems like ideologically opposed for some fucking reason, because she's just a capitalist. She's just a right-winger at this point. She's ideologically married to that position, rather than somebody like what the kind of current incarnation of the Tories we have at the moment, which is just no ideology, just power. Doesn't really matter what. They'll do anything to be able to maintain it, as we've seen over the past 24 hours.
Yeah, I actually think, like you touched upon there, the Tories would be much more likely to embrace not just nationalisation, but a ton of left-wing policies, more so than Labour, because I think Labour are so desperate to kind of distance themselves from the Jeremy Corbyn era that they're absolutely terrified of words like nationalisation, even though it was one of Starmer's key pledges was to, nationalise our industries, our public services. They're not going to do it now. So, you've got this bizarre thing where Starmer's basically shown himself very publicly to be a liar, to, make 10 very clear promises and then, go back on all of them and then say, oh, but I'm the guy that you can trust to be Prime Minister. I'm the credible one. Really? I don't know. I'm kind of I think like a lot of people now, I'm just feeling very disillusioned by the whole thing. I think party politics is just a mess. I was a Labour member for quite a while. I gave so much to the Labour Party. Now I don't feel like I want to fight for any party, because no party's given me anything to fight for. And you know what? I might be considered left wing. Really, my politics, I've never given a shit about words like left and right wing. It's about showing me something that's going to improve my material interests. My material conditions. And neither party's doing that. They're not offering anything to people like me. Keir Starmer is just saying, I'm the one who represents the working class because look at me, I'm draping myself in a flag. Boris Johnson, quite brilliantly in some ways, Boris Johnson saying, I'm the one who's representing the working class because I'm the anti-establishment guy. He's actually the establishment on steroids, but because he's unconventional, he's got that Donald Trump thing going for him where he kind of embarrasses the establishment, so it creates the illusion that he's anti-establishment. So that's quite an effective thing, and that's One of the main reasons why the Tories are nailed on to win the next general election is because, they've kind of got the opposition thing going for them where, we're the anti-establishment ones, we're the ones who are going to tear things up and change things for the better, whereas you've got Keir Starmer saying, I am the establishment, I'm going to continue business as usual because my focus groups have told me that's what you lot like. And actually, you speak to actual human beings, and it's not what anybody wants. Everybody, regardless of whether the left or right wing, is fed up with politics as it is at the moment. That's the one thing you will get people to agree on. You'll say to them, what do you think of our political system? It's a complete and utter joke. It's a farce. It's corrupt. Nobody's listening. Nobody's representing. Everybody's just kind of ventriloquizing us. They're telling us, what we want, what we need, but they're not actually addressing things. They're not addressing, why are so many people eating from food banks? They're not addressing why we can't afford to put our heating on, etc. And every time they do something, it's always to prioritize capital.
Yeah.
We are basically an afterthought.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the thing is, you were talking about how Keir Starmer going back on a bunch of his pledges and watering down policy, so it's basically nothing at this point, and going away from the value of left wing policy because he thinks that they're so brain poisoned and obsessed with distancing themselves from Corbyn policy, essentially socialist politics of 2017, 2019, right? They're so absolutely desperate to distance themselves from it that they don't even realise that they're destroying the party. They think that they're married to it so far. They've got this sunk cost fallacy. Well, we've started now. We can't stop. When it's just completely senseless. When people in this country they like these policies. It was never to do with the policies with regards to quote unquote unpopularity of Corbyn, which is kind of a lie anyway. But that's a topic for another time. It was never about the policies, ever. Things like more social housing, a higher minimum wage, renationalising the parts of the NHS that have been sold off, nationalising, utilities, rail, bus services. These are all things that people overwhelmingly support all the time. When you poll people on these issues, even people having houses built in their area, council housing built in their area. Even then, they still support these issues, not as much as in general over the general population, but they still support these on a large scale. The fact they come and say, "Well, we can't do these policies because these are Corbyn policies." I'm just don't think that why. But they just in this mind prison they can't escape from, where everything is just this kind of this Corbyn monster looming behind them, trying to telling them which policies they can and can't do. No, just look at what people like, what people need, what's going to be good at, as you said, increasing the material conditions of the working class in this country, and stop obsessing over this awful optical game that they aren't even winning at the moment anyway.
You know what really makes me laugh about Keir Starmer? If Keir Starmer was who he said he was when he stood for the leadership, he would be the next prime minister of this country, 100%. Because what did he say? He said, I'm going to be the one that's going to kind of unite the left and the right of the party. I'm going to end the warring. I'm going to bring people together. I'm going to cut out all of the fighting. I'm going to kind of be the compromise guy. I'm going to be a little bit respectable, a little bit establishment, but at the same time, I'm going to introduce some left-wing policies. And, we all thought under Starmer, yeah, maybe we'll not get everything we want, but we on the left who are supposed to be so uncompromising and everything else, we would have gotten behind that. Even if we only got half of what we were being offered in 2017, we would have still fought tooth and nail for Keir Starmer, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to stamp us out. They wanted to crush us, humiliate us, get us out the party, and not give us even the slightest bit of representation. We weren't going to get the slightest concession from these people. As far as they're concerned, they want market-driven politics. They're essentially conservatives. At one point I would have considered them moderate conservatives. Now I'm genuinely not sure whether they're more right-wing than the Conservative Party themselves. I think some of them certainly are, like Rachel Reeves. And it just, we're supposed to have options. It's not just supposed to be we've got the sensible lawyer conservative in Keir Starmer versus the buffoon conservative in Boris Johnson who pretends to be anti-establishment, but actually they're ideologically equivalent. We're supposed to have meaningful options, and we're not being given any of them.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just it's completely farcical at this point, and I think it's incredibly sad. I think you're absolutely right in that if Starmer had just adhered to the policy platform that he put out when he was gunning for Labour leader, I know plenty of people who vote for him saying, well, look, if we're going to, maybe we do need to change tactics if we're going to try and get elected, and then maybe we can be more radical then. Keir Starmer has got this. He's got essentially a platform that I agreed with when he was running for leader. I didn't vote for him for leader, but he did have a platform that I at least agreed with a lot of it, because a lot of it was just kind of general shared like social democratic values that he put out in his original pledges when he was gunning for Labour leader. Obviously, that's fucking in the bin now. It's been completely scrapped. Like the fact that we have two political leaders who are just proven liars, proven charlatans, proven that you just cannot trust them. That to point at which, well, why would you ever go with the politician who you can't trust, who's also completely fucking ineffective and pathetic? He never holds the Tories to account on anything. The whole, like, we've literally been through a pandemic where hundreds of thousands of people are fucking dead, and we can't even get the leader of the opposition to hold them into account. It's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. Like, say what you want about Angela Rayner, she's done incredibly cringe stuff, like the Corbyn photobomb things, and her, like, trying to distance herself from, the union movement that she grew out from, and stabbing Rebecca Long Bailey in the back. But at least she uses her platforms to attack the Conservatives for their failures, and she at least pretends to front-facing. I don't know what she actually believes, but at least she puts forward the idea that left-wing proposals are good. She takes the initiative to say, look, we want to offer a contrary narrative to what the Conservative intelligentsia are spinning. But Starmer's pathetic. He's a fucking waste. He doesn't do anything. What fucking forensic Keir Starmer? But it's a bunch of. It drives me up the wall. It really does.
What Keir Starmer doesn't understand is Keir Starmer thinks he's put himself as being the respectable Conservative versus Boris Johnson, who's not the respectable Conservative. What's actually happening in reality is Keir Starmer is looking like the weak Conservative and Boris Johnson's looking like the strong Conservative. Boris Johnson is so strong that it doesn't matter how badly he fucks up, he still maintains popularity. Keir Starmer is so weak that it doesn't matter how badly Boris Johnson fucks up, he can't gain any popularity. So he's looking weak, he's looking ineffective, he's looking like no matter how tough he is against his own party, he's looking like he can't control his own party. He just alienates them. He completely fails to win anybody over, and everybody's kind of just looking at Keir Starmer and thinking, what is the point of this guy? The Conservatives aren't going to vote for him because they're going to vote for Boris Johnson. The kind of moderates or the floating voters, they're completely indifferent to him. None of them are excited by him, apart from a tiny handful of people with FBPA in their profile who are maybe a bit centre-right. There's maybe a few thousand of those on Twitter. Beyond that, absolutely nobody gives a shit about anything Keir Starmer has to say. You look at him when he goes out in the public and tries to speak to people, he looks like he's never had a conversation with a human being in his entire life. And it's just like, he can't relate to normal people. Look at whatever people might think about Jeremy Corbyn. When Jeremy Corbyn went out and met people, he'd pick up their babies, they'd put their arms around him, or he'd put their arms around them, and people were genuinely affectionate towards him. And even when it was people that didn't like him, when they were asked what they thought about him after meeting him, more often than not, they would say that he was really nice and really likable, and you got that quite a lot. And I remember there was one woman who met him, and she'd said something like, she'd thought that Jeremy Corbyn was a terrorist sympathiser or something, and they said, do you still think he's a terrorist sympathiser? And she went, no, probably not, because she met the real man. And that was the Jeremy Corbyn effect. The more you saw of Jeremy Corbyn, the more people liked him. That's one of the key reasons why he surged when he went out campaigning in 2017, because people were seeing him and he started attracting these massive crowds. Keir Starmer saying, I'm not going to go out and do these public appearances. The reason why is because nobody would turn out for him, and anybody who did see him on camera, they're going to be completely uninspired by him. When he does speeches, he's completely wooden. When he tries to talk to people one-on-one, he doesn't know what to do. When he tries to ask difficult questions, he's terrified to answer them because he's terrified of sounding too conservative. He's terrified of sounding too left-wing, and he doesn't know which way to go. So what I do is I respect that he's a man of principle and he stands for something. Keir Starmer's not standing for anything, and we've got two main leaders who are both, neither of them I think are standing for anything. Both of them are just desperate for votes, however they come in, and that it can sound like it's a sensible thing from an electoral strategy, but what it actually means is nobody gets represented and everybody loses. And I just think, people are seeing through it now. That kind of politics is dead. It's in the past. Once upon a time, it would have worked. I remember when I was younger, my level of politics was, David Miliband, he looks good in a suit. He looks like a statesman. Maybe we should make him prime minister. Eventually, what happens is we start seeing through that and we start realizing this kind of politician offers us actually bugger all. And in the case of David Miliband, it turned out he had complete and utter contempt for the working class, which is really galling because he was actually an MP. He was parachuted in just up the road from me, and it was like he had no affinity with the area whatsoever, no affinity with the people. We're fed up with that kind of crap. We want people who actually give a shit about us. When you've got politicians like we've got, luckily in my area, we do have some really good politicians, who are like proper working class people, but it's like a tiny handful of them. We had one obviously up the road, Laura Pidcock. She was we lost her. We need more politicians like that, and it's one reason I just think if we had a new party, we could be standing, Laura Pidcock's in every seat, and I think that's what we need. We need that kind of person, Laura Pidcock, Zora Sultana, that kind of person. We don't need Keir Starmers. We don't need David Miliband. So, that kind of politics, I think, is over. I think it actually died with Gordon Brown, if I'm honest, and I don't think there's any going back to that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We live in, and like the crazy thing. I was watching a really good video by Zex Easy. Well, he was talking about in the kind of the scheme of American politics. We're talking about, well, okay, well, if the Democrats are in power, it's not like we don't get anywhere near close to like the kind of social democracy that America needs, but at least you can try and move the Overton window from there. Sure, you can win over like the liberal voters, like the swing voters who are engaged in politics. There's a huge number of people who are completely disengaged from politics who need something to. They need to have something to vote for. Don't need
It's
to
actually
vote
the largest
again.
chunk of the electorate.
Exactly. These are people we can reach out to. There's always going to be the next moment. There's going to be the next like BLM movement. There's going to be the next. Well, I mean, obviously, Extinction Rebellion kind of died, but without getting too much impetus. But there are other movements like this, large mass movements of people understanding that we can't continue this way forever. Like the planet's finite. The planet's dying. The gap between the rich and the poor is growing vastly. Like people will understand eventually that these times of crisis are going to be upon us again. And when that happens, like when you remember, I was looking at videos of like the BLM protests in Portland, and it was just people's mums, like people's mums coming out to protest in support of a large scale political activist movement in the form of clear bias on the part of the state against people of color in the United States, right? That movement's going to come again. Something like that's going to happen again when we see levels of civil unrest, level of civil disobedience, levels of people who've realised they're tired of taking shit, right? That's going to happen again. And we need to be there with the answer. We need to be there to engage these people, to radicalise these people, to get these people on board with things like, look, things may suck now, but there's a better way. Things can change. You have the ability to be able to help bring about change, because these people are otherwise going to be completely disinterested. We need to sell the socialist vision to these people and say, look, like you're going to work 45, 50 hours a week, getting paid shitty wages, so that both you and your partner have to work to pay your rent and to feed your kids, right? Like that was not a world we lived in 40, 50 years ago, where you could buy a house and support a family on one income. Like say, we can have that again. That can happen. Like they're trialing things like 4-day work weeks and universal basic income in European countries without fucked political systems like ours. These are things that we can have. We can make life better for working people. We just have to get them to have the will to want to see the change. And we're not going to get that from charisma vacuums like Keir Starmer.
Yeah, one point I would like to make is I just think the reason every time I make a point of this, everybody just thinks I'm attacking all boomers. I'm not. But the reason that we're in this situation now is because of the boomer voter base is basically outvoting us. They're outnumbering us. 20 years from now, that's not going to be a thing anymore. And in 20 years' time, I don't think my generation, even if we have a bit more wealth and a bigger stake in society, I don't think we're going to forget what capitalism's done to us. I think our generation is so deeply scarred. I was just personally kind of so taken aback by the lack of opportunity. I was one of the Thatcher children. I grew up in the Thatcher years, and we grew up with this idea that things were going to get much better. It was horrible. We hated Margaret Thatcher, but we really were optimistic that things were going to get better, and they started to get a little bit better for a while in the Blair years, and then they started to get worse again, and we realised we'd just been lied to and we'd been screwed over, and our futures had basically been stolen. You mentioned earlier that you're on £21,000 a year. Now, where I'm from, £21,000 a year is a good fucking wage. It makes me laugh when they'll say things like, "Oh, just get a better job." It's like there are no fucking better jobs. Like, just stop patronizing us. Unless you want us all to move to London, like, what do you want everybody in the country to move to London? You've literally northeast towns like mine. You've left us with absolutely naffle. Everybody, literally everybody, is on a crap wage, bar about 1% of us, if we're lucky, that might have a better job. The people who have better jobs tend to be the ones who go and work away somewhere and then come back home again. Around here, there is just nothing. And I think no matter what happens 20 years from now, if my generation is doing a bit better financially, but we see that 20-year-olds to 40-year-olds are being screwed over like we were, I think we're going to remember what that feels like. And I think the establishment knows this. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're looking now at kind of changing things around within our democratic system to disempower us, because they know that the game is close to being up for the establishment, and the establishment's got two options. It can either go with the democratic will of the people and it can start treating us more fairly, which it really doesn't want to do, or it can kind of get a bit more authoritarian, tighten the screw. And as you touched upon earlier in this, that's going to kind of lead to loads of civil unrest, and things are going to get very messy, basically. So the ball's essentially in their court. We don't want this fight. We just want to be treated fairly, and we just want representation. We're not the ones being unreasonable. Let us earn a fucking living wage. Let us actually be able to afford to put heating on. Let us, I've got a hole in my kitchen ceiling that's been there for God knows how long. I can't afford to fix it. You know what I mean? Things like that. It's like middle class people just kind of take this for granted. And I say middle class people down south, basically, because people up here, like, I don't know any middle class people. We've just got nothing. We can't even afford the basics of life, and it's not because we're stupid. It's not because we're lazy. No, this is systemic. It's anybody who kind of thinks that we live in a meritocratic society. They have to explain regional inequality, and that's one thing that you can't explain. If you think that this is a fair society and societies working correctly, then explain to me why the Southeast is doing so much better than the Northeast. Do you think we're like intrinsically less hardworking, less intelligent, less capable than you lot are? Because if the answer to that is no, then you have to accept that the problem is actually systemic. And when nothing is being done year after year, generation after generation, you have to say that what we actually need is a major change.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it stands to reason. I was on Twitter at one time, and I was watching. I think it was a couple. I think it was last week, and Benjamin Butterworth was responding to a tweet about living standards, or whatever, by saying, "Well, there are some people on 30K in London who can't. They're finding it difficult to get on." I'm like, it is. It's incredible to me, like the way in which kind of liberal conversations go, where liberals think that 30K is somehow not it's like somehow like a low wage. Well, that's above the median wage. Right? The median wage in this country is £27,000. Like 30K is like gold dust as far as I'm concerned at this point. The liberals just don't. They live in a different world than we do. Like middle class liberals like this guy, and it's frustrating to have to deal with. And you're absolutely right. We don't live in a meritocratic society, and I fucking hate it when people say, "Oh, just get a better job." I'm like, first of all, you're absolutely right. There are no better jobs, and second of all, like, okay, do the people who say get a better job, do they not shop at Tesco? Do they not? Do they not eat out at McDonald's? Do they not, use all of these facilities that need working class people to be able to work at, right? Like, do they not use these facilities? Like, what happened if every single working class person became like a management consultant overnight? The entire economy would collapse. Like, a year ago, working class people were key workers, we were essential workers, we were people that the economy were completely invaluable to the economy as it stood. I'm like, well, okay, so what you're saying is that even though we're completely invaluable to the society we live in at the moment, that we shouldn't expect to be able to take care of ourselves on the wages for the jobs that we do that are invaluable. It's completely like a completely circular logic that doesn't make sense in any kind of regard. Like, it's maybe it's just me. Maybe this is just like an axiomatic position that other people don't hold. But I think that if you work a job, right, you should be able to afford to be able to live a life with at least some level of luxury, to be able to buy a house to be able to have a family. I don't think that's too much to ask. Do you like? I think most people would gel with that opinion for what I think a good society should look like, which we don't have at the moment. We don't have anywhere close to that. It's like that's a pipe dream for everyone in our generation, because we've been removed from home ownership, because they've not been like, the private sector hasn't built houses, because why fucking would they? Why would they increase their supply and make their assets drop in value? Why would they do that? We've been removed from good pensions. We've had our entire, we're looking at an NHS that's probably not going to deal with the level of care that we're going to need when we reach their age, the age of what the boomers are now. Like, I don't fault boomers for the way in which they vote. Like, everyone at some level is molded by their material conditions at the end of the day. And a lot of boomers now they've quit the workforce. Their level of wealth is tied to their value of their house. And so they're just going to want to look for policy platforms. They're going to keep that continuing to go up. Like, that's terrible for us, right? But as far as they're concerned, that's their own personal interest. That's what's going to motivate them to get engaged with the political sphere. Now they're not part of the workforce anymore. All of the policies that a good Labour Party would be able to put forward that would benefit them if they were in the working population, they don't care. They don't have to care. They don't have to look towards that, because it's not in any way going to affect them. You look at there's a really great article on New Statesman where they looked at the election results of 2019 with and without retirees. If you take away retirees, every single income bracket up to £100,000, majority voted Labour over Conservative, right? Like, it's not this. You kept hearing in the press, "Oh, Labour are losing the working class." That was like during the Corbyn era. That was absolute bollocks. That was not true. Maybe it's true now. Maybe it's true now that Starmer just has completely given up on working class politics. But during the Corbyn era, that was just fundamentally not true. The problem is that we live in a country where working class is like a vibe that people think, they internalise that what actually working class is just like a vibe. It's, do you speak a certain way, do you wear certain clothes, do you act a certain way, rather than a economic relationship to the means of production, which is what it actually is, or a level of income that you have to be able to live off, the material conditions that you live in, which is far more unifying than any kind of cultural trappings that have traditionally surrounded that really don't. Like, who is more working class, someone who lives in Bolton but owns an artisan pizzeria, or someone who lives in in the city centre in, say, Birmingham or somewhere, but rents their own apartment and earns less than 20k a year on minimum wage? Maybe they have liberal values, like, quote, like they live on the wrong side of the culture war. But does that make them any less working class? I don't think so.
It really drives me crazy, because it just seems to be this thing where, like you said, if you've got an accent, then that's enough to be considered working class. You actually have a lot of very privileged people deliberately putting on an accent because they want to sound more street and sound like the more working class. It's just ridiculous. You don't judge working class by that standard. It's like, what was it? I think the BBC, the news channels, they used to always wheel out this guy. I can't think of what he's called, and he owns a plumbing firm. He lives in a villa in Marbella, and he would be the one that would lecture us on what the working class want and tell us how the Labour Party's out of touch with the working class. We had Lord Sugar, Alan Sugar, telling us, because he's got a bit of an accent, he's the one that knows what working class people want to say. Mate, you're a freaking multi-millionaire. How much have you got in the bag? Like, when was the last time you went without food? You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like when you've got to buy your fucking kids' school uniforms, and you're thinking, do we go without food for a couple of days so we can buy these fucking uniforms? You don't understand any of this shit. Stop lecturing us and stop talking about all this bollocks about entrepreneurs and stuff. That has no relevance to my life whatsoever. Stop talking about crap like the stock markets or even the housing market. It has no relevance to my life. Tell me what you're going to do, what your plan is to make sure that people can eat, have a roof over their heads, feel comfortable. But the elephant in the room is this. The elephant in the room is that they don't want to change any of that because they want to keep us disempowered, because that's the optimal way for the capitalist system to work. They have to keep us disempowered because that's how they can force us to work longer hours. That's how they can get away with paying us less, because they keep us in a weakened position where we don't have any rights, we don't have a real voice in the system, and we just have to do as we're told.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the more we have to work and the harder we have to think about working, the less likely we are to have the energy to engage in political action. Like, there was like there's some like ridiculous shit. I saw an article in the Telegraph about how millennials have taken up polyworking. Like, no, what you're describing there is people who are so poor they have to take up a second fucking job. Like, it's completely ridiculous. Although I was seeing what some millennials were doing. They were taking a second job, but working them both from home at the same time, which I think is genius because it's like the way in which we organize work at the moment in a post-industrial, post-automation society is completely fucking unreasonable. We just have this weird attachment to the idea that 40 hours is what people should be working if they deserve to be able to participate in society. When with automation, we don't really need to. And we get paid for the amount of time we have to give up. We have to allocate a certain amount of our lives to be able to make other people richer, for them to take our surplus labor value, right? That's what we have to be able to do. And really, no, we should get paid on what we produce, on the level of what we actually do for a company. That's why I'm a big fan of the worker cooperative model, because not only does nobody have any of their surplus labor value extracted because everyone votes on the way in which the company revenue gets distributed between the workers within the company themselves, but also because you have a actual market feedback from the decisions you make within the company within a cooperative. You then have your own personal drive to want to make it better because you see the direct remuneration from the fruits of your labor that you engage in. Like, so, whereas if you're working in a company where they just pay you a wage and that's it, you're incentivized to not care. You're incentivized to do as little work as you can and get away with not doing work for as much of the day as possibly can, because it doesn't matter whether you're the star employee, whether you're employee of the month, you're still going to get paid minimum wage at the end of the day, like minimum wage, minimum effort, because I know people who are software developers, right? And what they'll do is they'll get told, well, you've got to be able to create this piece of software, but we're going to pay you the same rate per hour, whether you do that in the first 2 days and the first 5 days. So why would you take 2 days over it? Well, it's completely inefficient. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked so many jobs, and I think we've all been there where you get your work done quicker than everybody else. You don't get any thanks for it. I remember one of the first jobs I had when I was young. I got a Christmas job at Marks and Spencers, and it just when we got our review at the end, it left me so exasperated, and it was a real eye opener for me for this is how the real world works because I was grafting so much harder than everybody else. I was working at twice the rate of everybody else. And then I would go up to one of the managers and I would say, I've done everything now. Is there anything else you want me to do? The way they framed that when they gave me the review at the end of the contract, because it was just a temporary contract, is they said, you look like you needed help all the time. You were always asking for help. I was like, are you having a laugh? I was like, when everybody else is standing around talking, I was grafting my arse off and you're throwing that back in my face. It's like, I didn't need help from you. It's like, I'd literally done everything. And it's just, you realize how utterly thankless having a real job is. This bollocks up. All you have to do to get far is you just have to work hard and impress your boss. Your boss does not want to be impressed by you. The harder you work, the more they just want to exploit you. You will do all of your work and then you'll get somebody else's work to do as well. And they will think that's absolutely fantastic. That's just the system we have. And that's why worker cooperatives are so important. The way that I view worker cooperative, it's imagine if the union and the workplace merged. That's kind of what it is. It's like you've just got that voice directly in your workplace rather than it being a separate thing. Because when it's a separate thing, it doesn't have anywhere near the same impact. And I mean, if there was an argument against making every big company a worker cooperative, I don't know what it is. And
Yeah.
I think this is the kind of thing that we really need to educate people on because I think the more people kind of become aware and understand what worker cooperatives are and how powerful they can be, I think the more people will say, well, why the fucking hell are we not doing this? This is something that society needs to be moving towards. I don't think it's necessarily the be all and end all. I don't think it's going to be the end destination where we kind of solve all of our problems. There are still going to be big problems associated with it. For example, under kind of essentially be a market socialist system, you're going to lift a hell of a lot of people out of poverty. What you're probably going to do is you're probably going to create a hell of a lot more consumerism as well. You're going to be consuming a shit ton of resources, and obviously we live on a planet of finite resources. We're going to have to start planning our economy and everything else to figure that side of it out. But it would be a step in the right direction. And I think it's just such a logical next step for society to take. And it's just a no-brainer because it wouldn't cost us anything. It would actually make businesses perform better. Because as you said, the workers would be incentivized. It wouldn't. Socialism, it always kind of gets accused of, oh, you lot don't understand economics. Well, this is a move that would make perfect economic sense. It would improve the economic situation of the country, inarguably. The only people that would lose out are the bosses who are currently in a position where they can pay themselves any amount they want, because suddenly the workers would be deciding what the bosses get paid rather than the bosses deciding what the workers get paid. So you'd see a complete role reversal, and that would be very interesting. And another thing is, in a situation like that, you're not just having to win over your boss is having to win over you. So it means they've got to fucking work for you. And that could be an absolute game changer for society. So I think that is a message that the left can really latch onto. And I think if there was, for example, a new left-wing party, that's a message they could really get behind. They could focus on the climate crisis, obviously, because that's like the big issue of our time. But they don't have to throw loads of policy proposals at us. They could just keep it nice and simple and say, you know what, we're going to change to this system where we're just converting all of the big businesses into worker cooperatives, and you're going to have more voice in the system, and this is going to result in more pay for you without it actually costing the economy a penny. I think that's a message that could really resonate with people if we actually push that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we get so much of our lives are like we think we live in a democratic society when so many of the things we have to engage in life are completely autocratic, and the workplace is one of those places. And I absolutely agree. I think you're absolutely right. It would be a game changer to get people on board. The fact that as a socialist voter in 2017, I was only made aware of the Inclusive Ownership Fund as a policy platform after the fact. I mean, first of all, it is an indictment of the media for not being able to put that across to people in a good fashion. Obviously, I know why they wouldn't, but obviously, that's clearly an issue. But second, of course, so it kind of hit home, like how kind of Labour needs to make their messaging better. They kind of shot a lot of policies at us, and we just kind of have to. It was kind of policy overload. Whereas if they just stuck to a bunch of clear things, and the Inclusive Ownership Fund was a really, really good policy that would have moved power from bosses to workers, was a really good platform to kind of build off. And I think you're absolutely right. And there is definitely plenty of problems with like market socialism as a concept. Like adhering to the commodity form it doesn't stop the overproduction that is kind of endemic to market systems in general, to commodified market systems specifically. But I do think that being able to take away majority power from capital and move it into hands of workers essentially gives us the political power to be able to make further changes moving forward, because people are more involved in their workplace. I mean, they're more involved in politics, they're more involved in decision making. Is going to give them the individual impetus to want to get involved in seeing further systemic change moving forward. So I think it's a good kind of stepping stone to more radical change later on. But you're absolutely right. Like from like an economic perspective, there's really no brainer. All the studies show they're more resistant to price shocks, and that they create more productive workplaces, and people working them are happier. Like there's no real reason not to do that.
Well, you would feel like you were part of something. I don't think I've ever worked a job where I felt like I was part of something, where it mattered, where I felt like I was cared. I've had jobs where I've liked going in just to see the people that I work with. And I think that's the one thing that kind of keeps most people going into jobs that they fucking hate. But imagine going into a job where you actually felt like you were part of something, you were building something together, and that it was benefiting everybody. Imagine how much more motivated you would feel. We're not even necessarily talking about, let's all pay ourselves huge sums of money or anything else. Just the fact that you weren't being treated like dirt, that you were being given a fair share of whatever the company's made, from a psychological standpoint, that makes a huge difference. I've worked jobs where we've had to ask for permission to go to the toilet. It's just humiliating. It's completely, it's it's kind of just like with a lot of people, it's in these workplaces, it seems to be power for power's sake. Like if you turn up 1 minute late for work, it's the end of the world and you're the most terrible person, and if it happens again you'll get fired. But they will think nothing about keeping you behind for 10 minutes after work. And it's just this balance of power. And we need as a society to be addressing that. But the moment we start addressing that first thing, like you said, the democracy in the workplace, everything else, all the other kind of power structures that are in place will just crumble one by one. And that's why the establishment will do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen, because they want to keep the system how it is. They like their wealth, they like their power, they like to be kind of living in a different world from the rest of us. They don't want to be seen as fucking equals. They don't want to be, living in the same kind of places as us, earning similar amounts of money to us or anything else. That would be fucking horrifying to them. They think they're superior to us in pretty much every way, and they want to keep it like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, it's cultural hegemony in practice, and that's why they character assassinated Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, because they didn't want to have to give up percentage of their shares to workforces, because that's, again, it affects their bottom line. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to engage in character assassination to be able to protect their profit margins, because that's literally what they exist to do. And if they didn't do that, the system would fall apart, and that is why capitalism is bad. Essentially, I wish I could be a little bit more erudite than just calling capitalism bad, but it is. It is a system which is it generates. I mean, I guess most all systems do. They generate attitudes that perpetuate the system. That's Gramsci in a nutshell, really. But it's like the way. That's why using our. That's why I think new alternative media is such an important platform to getting our views across. Obviously, it can be difficult when we look at things like the way in which platforms can remove our content if we do, but we can always find ways around that. Being able to get our message out there to people that a better world and a better life for everybody is possible. It's a thing we can do. We just have to have the will to power.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think, that's basically what I think we on the left who are on Twitter and other platforms quite a lot. I think that's basically our goal. It's about growing a movement, growing networks, because we've realized we're tapping into something essentially. It's almost like it's a new way of unionizing, so the unions were a kind of way for people to collectively get a voice. It's a new way to collectively build a voice, and it's a new way to fight back against power. And of course, that's why they've been looking at everything they can to kind of take that away from us. I think the establishment has realized they've maybe got about a 10-year window of opportunity because after that, the voting demographics in this country are going to look so different. If they don't get to grips with this within the next 10 years, I think they've realized that the game's probably going to be up for them. So they're desperately looking at how can they get back to the situation where everybody was getting their information from the likes of the Sun newspaper, which is when I was growing up, it was the Sun and the news of the world. That was our political education. It seems fucking hilarious now. It just seems utterly ridiculous. But my politics used to be reading Trevor Cavendash's column in the fucking Sun. Like, that's what they want to get back to. They want to keep that level of ignorance where you're just being given this really simple political worldview and you're not able to see these other ideas. You're just told that these other ideas are bad. Don't even look at them, and that's it. And we're changing that. That's basically our role on the left now, is to kind of build a movement and to raise awareness and kind of raise class consciousness so
Yeah.
that people realize there's different ways. There's different ways of doing things. We're constantly having the slide pushed up on us that this way of having liberal democracy is the only system that's ever worked, and it's the only system that can ever work. And it's provably bullshit. The best system that we've ever had in this country is not the system that we currently have. The most successful system we ever had was for a very short period of time when we had Clement Attlee in charge, and he gave us the NHS and everything else, and they were showing us something better, and we could have really built on that. But the establishment made sure that it just gradually moved us away from that, and convinced enough people that this was actually a really bad idea. But I mean, the thing is, with, for example, the NHS, the problem that the establishment has is people are really attached to it, so they have to constantly try and undermine it and just gradually chip away at it year after year until they finally get to the point where they can get rid of that, and we end up with a fully marketized system, which is obviously their ultimate goal.
Yeah, and it's why it's really kind of doom. It's kind of doom appealing at the moment to watch the way in which Conservatives just kind of getting away scot-free with being able to essentially tear up the fabric of the political system that we're a part of, and cynically as well. This is not, again, I've always said that I don't think it's ideologically driven. It's just they want power, they want money, they want to be able to protect the interests of the people who pay their bills. And the Owen Paterson case has just shown us that they have no intention of being able to of playing, at least playing by the previous set of rules that they were supposed to be engaging in. And again, it is the failure of liberal democracy, and this is the way in which it's going to tend to when people's material conditions deteriorate. Like and they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that they do not ever lose power moving forward. And it's only by building a wide base of class-conscious people that we're ever going to be able to find a way around that. Otherwise, people are going to be victims of manufactured consent until kingdom come. So that's why we need to use our platforms that we have effectively. And you're absolutely right. It's kind of like a new form of union organizing using social media platforms and social media communities. I think that's a really good analogy. I didn't think of it that way before, but that's a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure what else to say now. I think we've pretty much covered everything.
Yeah, we really have. We kind of shot the shit today, didn't we?
Yeah, I'm not even sure how long this has gone on for. 1 hour and 20 minutes. I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I think we've covered everything we pretty much need to cover tonight, really, now.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. I really appreciate you coming on. Obviously, we're looking forward to the Socialist Chat Room on Sunday, where we'll both be talking about the climate meeting in Glasgow, which Jesus fuck, we're going to have so much to talk about. We should probably do a long show.
Oh, I'm gonna, you know what? I'm just the billionaires are gonna get it. I've got so many fucking one-liners ready for these bastards. The politicians are gonna get it. I'm just gonna give them such a fucking hard time because it's just the astounding hypocrisy, and they're not gonna be let off the hook on this. So yeah, there's gonna be a lot to prepare. It should be a fun one.
Absolutely, I'm well looking forward to it. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
Cool.
And I'm gonna fucking Boris Johnson with that. Oh, we're 5-3 down against the climate. I'm like, Boris, the world's gonna end. Please, can you take it fucking seriously? what fucking state this country's in, Jesus?
Oh my God! We could just literally just choose a random person to be prime minister, and they wouldn't do a worse job. We just get a random drunk off the street and put them in charge of the country. Would you notice the fucking difference?
I mean, a random drunk would probably be better, because at least they'd understand what living like a normal person is, rather than just guy who's got fucking educated at eating with a silver spoon in his mouth his whole fucking life.
Yep. I mean, to be fair, a lot of these guys that you speak to in pubs, they're actually a little bit politically switched on, and like you say, they're in touch with the real world. They've worked real jobs. Yeah.
Exactly. 100%. You're absolutely right. Do you want to shout out your socials while you're here? Obviously, probably more people know you than I will, but more people know you than know me. But might as well shout out your socials whilst you're here.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter if you're not already at RD_Hale. Keep forgetting what it is. Yeah, that's it. In any case, yeah, that'll do.
No worries. And you also follow. You want to go subscribe to Council Estate Media on YouTube, and you want to follow RD Hale on Facebook as well.
Yeah, you can do that as well. I'm not as much on Facebook as I am on Twitter, but yeah, feel free.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and I will see you on Sunday. You take care of yourself.
Okay, I will see you then. Thank you very much. Good night.
See you later. Bye. Well, that was a really good chat. I'm glad we did that. Let me just stop the segment there. How are we doing, chat? Chatters who are left. Let's move on. We're going to have a look at the Gothix versus Hunter Avallone debate, because my God, I saw Vosh kind of covering the first bit of it, and it was so ridiculously dumb that I had to get involved myself. So let's bring it up. Impromptu debate, Gothix versus Hunter Avallone fight. Let's go watch this. No, that's not what I want. That's the one I want. There we go.
All right, let me get you on my screen too. I'm not actually live at the moment. I'm not live till 6, so I wanted to jump on. And in honor of the stream, I am wearing, there you guys go, the Make America Great Again shirt that I literally only was wearing because, like I said, I was going to be going live at 6, threw this one on, and then I just...
Let's start that segment again. So yeah, so I was going to cover the Hunter Avallone versus Gothix debate. I watched the first couple of minutes of this when Forsh covered it the other day, and I realised that Gothix is an absolute fucking clown. So I've not watched this past like the first like 5 minutes. So let's have a look and see what goes on here because I reckon it's going to be pretty funny.
All right, let me get you on my screen too. I'm not actually live at the moment. I'm not live till 6, so I wanted to jump on. And in honor of the stream, I am wearing, there you guys go, the Make America Great Again shirt that I literally only was wearing because, like I said, I was going to be going live at 6, threw this one on, and then I just tuned into your guys' stream and hear the other girl saying that I became super emotional, and then, of course, I saw your video today, so I don't know. Where do you want to start? What do you want to talk about?
I want to know what the hell happened. Hold on, Stas. Let me handle this. I want to know what happened because I researched you beforehand and I said, okay, this guy likes to sling shit. So I said, let me go into this, hoping for a nice civil conversation. And at the end of the conversation, I literally told Starson, I said, I don't know what the hell happened, but that went a lot better than what I thought. And then I held my breath. Less than 24 hours later, you got something on TikTok. Look at this conservative something. I don't know.
I mean, it was a funny part. It was a funny clip, and then you accused me. But
can I respond?
Can I also, please? Can I respond?
Absolutely. When I'm done talking. Okay.
So okay. Do you think you look good in that right now? But okay.
You don't. Okay. This is clearly we're off to a great start. This is.
I mean, you're being super condescending. You say that I don't let you talk, and then you're not letting me talk. So it's just.
Okay. I'm about to mute your ass in a second.
She's
Whoa,
furious.
Give me a second.
Wow.
All right. Let's try it again. Let's take it from the top. We got this. We can figure this out. Here we go. Welcome back. Welcome back, Hunter. Welcome back. You good? You cooled off?
I'm trying to have a conversation with you, and it's rather difficult. But please continue.
It's not hard to have a conversation if you keep interrupting people.
Well, okay. Go ahead. Please continue making your point.
Thank you so much. So anyways, as I was saying, less than 24 hours later, you go on TikTok, you splice things together, and you call me a conservative. And that tells me you don't know me. You don't know my positions. You don't know my arguments because I have never in the existence of making YouTube content referred to me as a conservative. So how are you coming to that conclusion, Hunter?
Sure. So based on your video that you made about identity, I have no responsibility to validate your identity or the way that you perceive yourself. Also, you should really not be taking any, confidence in how other people are referring to you. After all, this is exactly what you said in your video about identity when it came to trans people. You said it's not my responsibility to validate anyone else's identity or how they perceive themselves and respect their labels. And I would say the same to you then. So I'll call you a conservative or really whatever I want. Because again, what you said is it's no one's responsibility to validate another person. And it's not my responsibility to validate you. Second of all, you lied in your video, or not, I'm sorry, not in your video, but you claimed that I deceptively edited that TikTok when I did not. I simply shortened it down because I can only post 3 minutes, but I watched the full clip first to make sure, and I left out no context. Everything that was shown on TikTok was completely accurate.
Okay, well, that's a lie. But let's go back.
How is it a lie?
I want to touch, hold on. I want to touch on the fact that you said it is not my job to represent you or whatever. First of all, I think you're getting the term validation and misrepresenting as well as encouraging different. Because I saw your little argument where you said that well, you don't want to do this towards kids. If you have a kid, you don't want to validate them. No, I will encourage my child. If my child says, I want to be an astronaut, I will encourage my child. I'm not going to validate their existence. You know you're alive, and we're talking about adults, grown-ass adults that want to be validated for how they identify. That ain't my job. That's no one's job.
You're asking me to do the same thing, though.
To your point where you said that it's not your job, it's not your business, as someone that has a platform, and again, listen, I love capitalism. I love people making their money, doing whatever they want to do to make your money. You obviously like the fighting aspect, that way of making money. That's not really my thing. But in any case, I would be so cognizant about how I address people in a public space to not intentionally misrepresent them. It would be one thing.
Would you misgender someone? What if they said that like they identified as a woman? What if they were biologically male but they identified as a woman and they asked to use she, her pronoun?
Now, this was the part of the conversation that I did catch. Well, I actually don't think Hunter comes off very well here. Like, obviously Gothix is an idiot, but like, sure, if somebody says they're not a conservative, like, only they know deep down what their own conservative views are. And like, I think this idea, but I also think this idea of like validating somebody's identity with regards to gender and with regards to their political positions is just a complete misdirection that doesn't really add anything to the conversation. Like, they're going to get lost in the weeds. Gothix is going to, make a fool of herself, obviously, but I don't think that Hunter's coming off very strongly or even making a good point here. And I think that what we define as conservative, what we define as liberal, what we define as leftist or rightist isn't really like it's not something that you can really kind of quantifiably define in a way that is going to make a lot of sense in regards to this discussion.
Would you respect them?
If someone no.
So why not?
Respect is earned. Respect is earned. Hello, nice to meet you, please and thank you. That is a common, the basic foundation for respect.
Even in your video, though, you acknowledged, though, excuse me, in your video, you acknowledged, though, that pronoun usage was absolutely part of showing respect. You deliberately said that part of respect is saying please and thank you, ma'am. You mentioned the pronouns. You brought that in.
No. Pronouns, male and female. These aren't pronouns. This is reality.
Wait, ma'am is a pronoun. Male and female is a sexual characteristic.
And this is
These are two different
male
things.
and female for
I mean, technically, ma'am and sir are honorary titles rather than, or honorifics rather than pronouns. But I don't think that particular, I don't think that sullies his point at all. I think it still makes sense. Like, these are, you would still defer to these terms because you're showing to respect people. But also, I just fundamentally disagree with Gothix here. I don't think respect is ever earned. You can lose respect. Like, you have to earn respect back if you neglect someone to the point at which you lose respect. But I actually think that, a default position we should have is respect everybody until they give you a reason not to. I think that going through life saying, well, if you don't do a certain thing, then you don't earn my respect. That's just a fucking sociopath. Like, that just makes you a cunt. Like, it just makes you a twat. Like, how would you go through life just treating everybody like shit until they give you some kind of reason with which you should actually respect them? Like, what kind of person goes through life like this?
For all of existence, male and females, we're adding all of these different labels to things. But this is not reality.
Well, hold on. This is the disagreement that we're having here, and I think that you're not quite understanding, and that's okay because I didn't understand this for a long time either. But it's not about like, for example, trans people. Okay, if someone's biologically male and they identify as a woman, they do not think that their biological penis magically becomes a vagina. They are aware of the fact that they differentiate a little bit biologically there. And that realization manifests itself in gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is the uncomfortable mental illness associated with being trans, where they are painfully aware that there is a misalignment between their body and their gender identity. So no one is actually advocating to change anyone, or no one's saying that males and females is wrong or whatnot. They're simply saying that there's a difference between sex and gender. There absolutely is.
I get what you're saying. I understand that. I hear you. But we're talking about assimilation and we're talking about acceptance. We're talking about two different things. If I see a guy that visibly looks like a dude and he calls himself a woman, he says, "Can you please use this pronoun?" I am not at liberty to. I'm not obligated.
What
to
if
do
they're
that.
dressed like a woman? So like,
Wait, it's not about the obligation. It's just about not being a bell end. Just like do it because you don't want to make people unhappy. What are these people who just like walk around the world just like not like minding their language or mediating their language to not upset people? Just walk around going, "Oh, your wife's a bit fat. Oh, this breakfast shit." I'm like, what kind of fucking sociopaths go through life like this? Just like, if someone asks you to use the pronouns, don't do it because you feel like you have some kind of like coerced obligation to, do something against your will. Just do it because you're not a twat. Because you're not so ideologically bound to making people miserable over the sake of a pronoun. Like.
But the medical, so for example, but it does. So the medical, no, it does because
hold on. But who was you transitioning for? Are you transitioning for yourself, or you are transitioning for other people?
Well, usually if you identify a certain way, hold on, wait, Gothix, wait. When there are people identifying a certain way, it only follows that the reason you're identifying that way is because you also wish to be identified that way by broader society, first and foremost. Second of all, the medical consensus in this issue is literally that if you are suffering from gender dysphoria, you take steps to socially transition. So this idea that some big muscular dude is just walking around saying, "Call me a woman or else," is just very much a straw man. It does not happen very frequently. Most of the time, we just have people that are trans and they are literally following the medical advice by socially transitioning. And that's why I said in my video that pronouns are ultimately a form of utility. If someone is wearing a dress, has long hair, and goes by a feminine name and wears lipstick and they're trans and they're identifying this way, it makes way more sense from a utility sense to just refer to them as a she, her, rather than there's that guy over there who's actually trans, but they're like, that doesn't make sense.
And that's a good argument from Hunter. It does essentially stem from social utility, but also, from your own perspective as someone, if you're interacting with somebody and you are in Gothix's position right here, and you find someone who is trans, and you say, "Well, I'm not obligated to use the pronoun they want, so I'm just going to do it to show them that I'm not cucked by the language police or whatever." In this position, there is no utility to that because you say, "Well, you're transitioning for yourself, not other people," but part of socially transitioning is through societal acceptance, right? Like the performative nature of gender and the way in which people react to you through that makes things, if people don't gender you in a way that you'd like to be gendered, that is upsetting. It makes your life materially worse. Whereas, how much materially worse is it if you are in Gothix position to just use the right fucking pronouns? Like, it's really not hard. And by putting up such a fight against something so simple as just pronouncing people correctly, it adds to a level of societal non-acceptance that does make trans people worse off in regards to their own mental health, with regards to new rates of acceptance is by far shown to be, or the rate of non-acceptance rather, are by far shown to be the main contributor to, you know, the poor mental health of trans people, the suicide of trans people, etc., etc. So if you just do something, like, why would you not just do something incredibly small just to give people some level of affirmation that makes their life materially better, right? It doesn't cost you anything. Like when someone says manners cost nothing, I'm just like, yes, absolutely, manners cost nothing, which is why I have them. Like why would you not just make the world a better place? It's just this hyper individualism of conservatives, which I would call her a conservative with positions like this, but you know, if she doesn't call herself that, whatever. I'm not going to get into that semantic argument. Of just, it's hyper individualistic of just like, well, only I can be a master of my own destiny. And if that gets in the way of other people, then too bad. It's just completely sociopathic.
Okay, let me say it from this perspective. I do not give a shit what anyone identify as. I don't care.
Then I don't give a shit what you identify as. So then you shouldn't. You just asked me not to call you a conservative, and you identify as politically homeless, and I'm not going to respect that.
I'm asking you to stop misrepresenting me.
When you stop misrepresenting trans people as their wrong pronouns and wrong gender, I will 100% follow your wishes as well.
Argument right now because I am friends with so many people in the trans community that do not subscribe to this nonsense of asking people to adopt to the way that you see yourselves. The trans people that I know, I can call them a man or a woman, and they're fine. They'll not skip a beat. They'll go about their day.
Bollocks, absolute bollocks. I'm calling out, and if she shows me proof of that, I'm calling out for the absolute fucking nonsense that is. Show me any trans person who is just happy being misgendered in public by their own friends. That's complete nonsense, absolutely.
Great, I guess.
Why can't that be the standard, and instead we resort to saying that's transphobic?
Well, I have a lot of friends that are politically homeless, and
just shut up and listen.
You've been talking for the last like 15 seconds here. I thought it was okay for me to
talk. It's my show. I'm trying to meet you midway. Honestly, Hunter, I don't like this back and forth. I really, really don't. I have never made a video dedicated to one specific YouTuber. I have been on the defense since I started making content. I do not enjoy this. This is not productive.
Can I? Okay, well, if you want me to leave, that.
Okay, sure, it's not productive getting all those views by being deliberately contrarian. Sure.
That's fine, but can you just? Well, you just said you didn't like this conversation, so what am I supposed to take from this? I also wanted to ask Starsan how she thinks that I have become far more emotional since walking away from the right. My positions have only largely grown in like basis in like empirical evidence and whatnot. So I would like to know how I am more emotional now.
Here's what I will tell you first, Hunter. I followed you a long time ago, back when I was much less noticing of what is on YouTube. I'm going to clarify a few things. What you're misunderstanding about what Gothix is saying, and even Gothix and I don't agree to a total point on this, is she's not saying she will refuse point blank to ever refer to someone as a preferred pronouns. What she's saying is she is not going to give that respect to someone that she neither knows and that doesn't know her, and will just walk up to her and say, you have to address me like this because it makes me feel good. I don't know you from a whole...
That just makes you a cunt. That just makes you a bellend. Oh, it's just like, oh, hello, my name, like, you just walk up to the random person, hello, my name's Mary. Actually, I'm going to call you twat. Okay, is that fine? I'm going to call you twat. Oh, that sounds a bit rude. Oh, tough shit. You can't police my language, twat. And then it's like, what kind of society do these people live in? Like, I thought there was supposed to be, like, this level of community building that was supposed to be part of, like, conservative thought. Well, I guess she's not conservative, so it doesn't really make much sense in this particular regard. But in general, people who also share these positions have this idea of, like, the level of community. And, like, this hyper-individualism is completely divorced from creating that community cohesion these people claim to really want. I mean, I guess I don't know whether she really wants that or not, because she's not told me that position previously. But in general, other people who share her similar positions on this particular issue also hold a very similar position on that issue, too, so...
in the wall.
And she's saying the same thing about me addressing her as conservative.
No, she is not. It's a difference. What you're saying
How?
is that this is a conservative that you've owned. And all she's saying is, if you're going to talk about me being a conservative, this is not a conservative. I am just someone out there. But at the end of the day, we don't care what you call us. We really don't.
So what are some
Because-
ideas that Gothix agrees with on the left? Gothix, what are some ideas that you agree with the left?
I would be so happy to hear them. I don't generalize ideas on the left because I realize. And
So what are some
recognize
ideas that are
diversity
generally
of thought.
lefty?
So you tell me. We probably have a lot more in common than you think. But we're never
Absolutely.
going to get to that point if this is if you're going into this with the intention of making clickbait.
I'm not trying to
my
make
YouTube
clickbait.
channel got deleted tomorrow. I'd be Gucci. I'd be good.
I'm trying to talk. I'm literally just asking. You say you're politically homeless. You don't like that I'm calling you conservative. So I'm asking you, what are some ideas that are generally associated with the left that you associate yourself with or you agree with?
You're gonna have to let me know. I have not.
Are you in favor of stronger social safety nets? Do you want stronger welfare? Do you want more? Do you want a higher minimum wage?
No, none of that. No.
Okay. Do you want worker owned means of production? That's like the further lefty stuff that I'm not in favor of either. But I'm trying to get a general idea. Like,
Worker owned, do you mean like sorry to interrupt. Do you mean like more unions, or do you mean like where the workers are more private business instead of big business?
wait, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Okay, so when you say more worker-owned businesses, are you meaning more like they have more stock, like they own stock in the business?
No,
do you
no, no.
mean
So
they're unionized,
yeah.
or do you mean that they actually own the business?
Talking about
I-
communism? Is that
So
what
so
you're
there's the so what I am, I'm a social democrat. So I believe in stronger social safety nets. We can basically just look at like other countries and see where they have stronger social safety nets. Universal healthcare, stronger welfare, a UBI would be great. We see a larger and more efficient level of economic mobility in other countries that tend to adopt these policies. So I'm a social democrat. However, a further left idea, which I do not.
I mean, that's mostly the third way, to be honest. Like, unless you're talking like SOIs and you're talking about like whole sector decommodification outside of healthcare, like I don't really think you can call yourself a social democrat. Like, this is just Blairism at the end of the day. But sure, whatever.
Subscribe to, is that the workers should own the means of production. And what that means is that, yes, they don't just own stock. There's not just strong unions. I'm in favor of strong unions. They actually like would seize the means of production from the owner, and then they would all begin to like take a share based on how much work they put into that company.
Okay, so I have the idea concrete in my head. So that means, like, let's say I owned a business and you and Gothix were my workers, and both of you were on my production line. Let's say you're building teddy bears, and you have both decided that Hunter, you're going to own the stuffing of the teddy bears, and Gothix, you're going to own the outer shell of the teddy bears, and I no longer get the right to them because you have decided on your own that is yours now.
Well,
And
yeah, I don't
have to
agree with
find a
this
way
at
to
all.
get-
This I was
no, but
just
I'm asking. I'm trying to get the idea.
yeah.
But if that's the case, I'm not for that either.
Yeah,
so
no.
Okay,
maybe
so
that
I'm
would be something we do agree on.
okay.
That's such like a ridiculous oversimplification of the issue. Oh my god. I was trying to explain like socialist principles to liberals is it's challenging.
Sure, I'm trying to think of like what ideas are or what positions are
simple one.
generally seen as like a little bit more left liberal. Like so
Let
for
me put it this way.
Go
Let me
ahead.
put it this way. There's probably a lot more policies and ideas that I agreed with when I was on the left, but I did not ask enough questions. Like, for example, if you had asked me before I walked away from the left, I would have said I'm in favor for more welfare. But now understanding what it's done, especially to the Black community and how people are stuck in that cycle, I am absolutely not in favor of that.
Sure. So that might be something we could agree with. So do you believe in any element of like systemic racism? Like if there is a policy like welfare that's disproportionately negatively impacting Black people, that would be a like.
I mean, there are definitely issues with the American welfare system, but the idea that welfare as an institution is something that is harming the Black community, that is fucking deranged. That's absolutely ridiculous. It is shown time and time again that countries with stronger social mobility, which includes large social programs, or it does also include, if you look at the Scandinavian nations, you look at whole sector decommodification, you look at state-owned enterprises that then then put funds into the government that they can then use to create social programs and create more social commodification, then this only leads to higher social mobility, to better outcomes for working people, more likelihood of working people moving through the class structure. Right? These are all things that are improved with more welfare. Like, this is empirical. You can't just disagree with this. This is shown time and time again. And because the level of social mobility in the US is fucking dog shit in comparison. Because if you are a member of the working class, it's incredibly difficult to accrue capital when you don't have access to any kind of fallback should things go awry, because the social safety nets in the US are absolute, a steaming pile of garbage trash, quite frankly. So, like, to say this harms the Black community, I have no idea how she's gonna defend that point. That's crazy.
Like sign of systemic racism. So would you agree with like that element? I mean, we might be able to find some common ground there.
No, I'm going to have to decline on that because systemic racism in particular, if we just take away the words, take away the meaning of systemic racism, it's this idea that this is somehow preventing someone of doing something. But it's not. We all have personal choices, and I know people like to say, pick, roll up your bootstraps, do whatever. If that's the term we got to use, that's the term we got to use. But I have people in my family that have dealt with racism, but you don't hear about it. They just do the thing.
Sure. And I actually would agree. So I would agree with you there, but I think that we might still be able to find common ground. So let me try to explain this really quick. So this doesn't have to be a dichotomy. So it's not actually systemic racism versus pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I believe that, I mean, let's look around in this country that we live in. There are systems, quote unquote, in every facet of life, more or less, right? We have the criminal justice system. That's the system that we go through if we're being prosecuted for a crime or whatever. We're all sort of a product, more or less, of the systems around us. So I agree with you that within these systems, absolutely, you should work to, quote unquote, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, work as hard as you possibly can to maximize your outcomes. However, the systems in place, you don't always have individual control over that. So when we're talking about personal responsibility, that's something that needs to be instilled on a family level. That's not really something that the government can necessarily do. What the government can do as far as policy is provide stronger social safety nets and whatnot. And with that also, we can talk about systemic racism and how that manifests itself. And again, I just want to be crystal clear. When I'm talking about systemic racism, I'm not saying that Black people are incapable of doing anything because racism is in their way. I'm simply saying that there are actually systems in place that have been empirically proven to disproportionately negatively affect Black people. And we can fix that without needing to talk about or without even ever bringing up white people bad or Black people can't do it or whatever.
Can you give me an example of the system?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And Hunter is absolutely 100% correct here. The idea that, if we include strong social safety nets, it's going to disincentivize people from wanting to make themselves better and to do the pull yourself up by the bootstrap thing. That's just fundamentally not the case as well. There's a good study that happened when they trialed UBI in, I think it was either Sweden or Finland, and essentially the results of this happened where the people who were on the UBI, essentially just given free money to exist, said, well, I felt more in tune to be able to pursue what I want to be able to pursue, to be able to make something of myself, where you get stuck in a rut if you're actually in poverty. Again, this is just personal experience and this is just anecdotal. I don't have any data on the specific side of the argument to say that, if you get trapped in a cycle of poverty, you just get to spend all of your time trying to grind through that, and it's very difficult for you to be able to take the time and effort to be able to break out of that cycle, whereas social safety nets allow you the freedom with which to engage in some level of personal responsibility to be able to get out of that cycle, which is why you see such high levels of social mobility in countries which have better social safety nets.
Absolutely. So the criminal justice system is a very clear-cut one about basically when we look at even if we want to go to so police violence, we talk about this a lot. And I know the response to that is, well, Black people commit more crime. And I would say, yeah, that's true. But why do Black people commit more crime? And it's because they are in communities that are disproportionately poor, and with poverty comes more crime. It's absolutely true that you can't deny this. This is an empirically proven fact. And the reason they are in these disproportionately poor areas is due to policies in the past, like redlining, that forced Black people into less than ideal communities and deprived them of being able to actually build equity in this amazing country at the time. They were prohibited from doing that, and we all can recognize how policies can have generational impacts. This is still hurting the Black community today.
Okay.
Give the government back. He's absolutely right here as well. Hunter's absolutely storming this. In that, in the early 1900s, Black people were literally prohibited from government-backed mortgages on homes, and we all know. I mean, definitely from somebody who lives in the UK, we all know how important home ownership is into building both personal wealth and then also intergenerational wealth. Which there's only 2 generations removed from that time, so this clearly has a large knock-on effect on these communities, and he is correct that poverty does drive crime. And the problem you have is if you just leave it down to this bootstrap mentality, all you just end up with is a shitty society. If you say, well, we're not going to try and fix these systemic issues, we're just going to have to wait for them to individually do it themselves. It makes society worse for everyone. If you have more poverty and you have more crime, and you say, well, we're just going to have to wait until they stop doing the crime, lol, just don't do it, then you just end up with a society full of criminals, which makes it miserable for the people who don't commit the crime. Whereas if you take from a institutional level, you institute policies that mitigate the causes of crime, you make society better for everybody else in turn too. It's not like a zero-sum game with regards to this. People don't lose out by people who are lower than them being lifted up, right? You don't see any material decrease in your own standards of living by doing so. If anything, the fact that the societies are happier and they're full of less crime, as you look at the Scandinavian countries in these instances, shows that that is the case. It makes life, the rising tide lifts all boats, so to speak.
Respectfully, you are making a generalized statement about the black community when you say that.
No, I'm not.
I grew up in the.
No, this is an empirical. He's making an empirical claim. Like I know that she's about to just say some random anecdote now, but he's making an empirical claim based on quantifiable data sets that we have from looking at decades and decades and decades of generational issues with regards to systemic problems that face the black community and face the working class community in America in general. Obviously, the ability to be able to accrue assets through home ownership is a specific black problem. But the way in which it's difficult to accrue capital outside of that for general working class people is the same too.
And I have a cousin right now that is incarcerated for several things, and he was in a good family members, entrepreneurs. He got caught up in the wrong friend group and did stuff because he wanted to be cool.
Was there like gang violence and stuff?
Yes.
Right.
Over and over again. I'll see this. They inject themselves into that through means of culture. It's not something.
Anecdotes aren't data. Anecdotes are not data. Say it with me. Anecdotes are not data. They're not. They're not data. Like, show me some empirical study. Show me something that shows that this is endemic to a level with regards to everyone else, rather than just this person that you're related to, right? Show us the data. Otherwise, this means literal nothing. This is like Tim Pool shit.
That is, here is this area of black people in crime. Yeah, let's get to the bottom of that. Why is it that crime is so high? Why are crimes getting committed? Why are crimes getting committed in the first place? I've been laid off. I've had negative balance in my checking account. I've had some terrible living situations. I've never stabbed nobody. I've never killed nobody.
I'm not asking about your personal experience necessarily, because I can't speak to that. But I'm also not generalizing anything. It is an empirically proven fact that black people disproportionately live in poverty. That does not mean that all black people live in poverty. That doesn't mean that just if someone is black, they live in poverty. I just explained to you the reason why is due to yes, largely policies like redlining and the drug war. So, for example, we have the policy of the drug war, which was implemented with explicit intent to screw over the black community. That is what Nixon said. He said we couldn't make it be illegal to be black, but we could associate the blacks with crack cocaine and heavily criminalize the cocaine. So when we talk about like the fatherlessness issue in these black communities, part of that is due to the fact that a bunch of black people are being disproportionately locked up for rather minor drug offenses. This tears families apart again.
No, I'm sorry. You know what tears?
It's not just culture. And why do they have that culture?
What tears families apart is the enabling of that bad behavior. We are talking about people that are committing crimes and then saying that they get screwed over. You committed a crime.
He's making not a crime. Decriminalize the drugs. It works. Look at Portugal. It works. I need to stop getting heated because this is just like, I hear this argument over and over again. And it's just like, well, you just have this like axiomatic position. You think drugs are bad. Well, no. Well, the outcomes, I guess, to my position as utilitarian, that drugs are what they are. Like, and we can take positions that would make things better or make things worse. I don't have any position against whether people should or shouldn't be able to do drugs. I understand that they're personally harmful, and if they led to a position where by legalizing them, society made society worse, it made drug offences go, made like people who commit serious offences because of the drugs they're consuming, or the way if it was say were to destroy somebody's life if it was legalized, I would be against it. But that's not what the empirical data says. The empirical data says there is utility to decriminalization because it takes the money away from the gangs, it takes it out of the cartels, it takes it out of this kind of underground rat's nest, and it turns it into something which is you can manage on a state level. You treat addiction as a disease, not as a crime, and you get people out of that cycle because they don't stay within that particular paradigm where they have to keep being below the law. They can be above board and they can come out of any kind of addiction that they have, and people who want to engage in it recreationally can do so without having to resort to getting involved in the underground kind of crime level that is a direct result of criminalization of drugs and the drug war in general.
They're saying
you gotta own up to it.
But they're not saying that. First of all, they're not.
Also, hold on. I gotta push back. Also, you just said something about that. That the reason that people are in poverty is because of something dealing with whatever. I'm gonna go look this up. I don't know exactly what the how they label the stats, but there is something that you can find data on this where it shows you that black people in America rank the lowest when it comes to financial maintenance, when it comes to opening up a savings account, building credit, things like that. And they spend more on physical goods.
But why is that?
Jewelry,
No,
but
why? But why do they do this? It's like it's almost as if sometimes disproportionately they lack the the education on how to better handle money. And when you lack that you lack education because you're living in poverty and the local schools are funded by your tax dollars. So when you're living in poverty, you also get a lesser education, which puts you in a situation where you're more likely to make those decisions. Also, just really.
Oh god, he's absolutely smashed this out. She's so close. She's so close to understanding why. And she's ideologically married to this position of like this individualist kind of garbage, like just world fallacy position that she's brewed up in her own head, right? Or that she's taken cynically because she doesn't believe in the position that she holds and she's just grifting for money. But, you know, maybe maybe the grift is like a double bluff and she really is, but she wants you to think she isn't because she said she is. Like, I guess. Either way, she's really close to grasping the issue, and she was just like, well, these things only happen in the black community all the time, but clearly it must be because of culture. There can't be any socioeconomic confound that's doing this. And it's like, maybe if you just take that extra leap, you'd understand what we can do to ameliorate that.
Really quick, people in your chat keep saying it's culture. There can be a cultural element to it, but again, we would have to ask why that culture is. And secondly, where people say, I'm a white messiah or trying to educate a black woman, very nice identity politics, guys. But anyway.
I get what they're saying because you have to understand the irony.
And he's right. Like he's absolutely right. If you have the empirical data on your side, it doesn't matter. Hey, welcome Raiders! Thank you very much for the raid, Chud Logic. We're watching Hunter Avallone absolutely eviscerating Gothix for being very, very dumb. Or just a grifter, but we don't know. Like as I was saying, just saying before you guys raided in, I don't know whether it's a double bluff, whether she's just calling herself a grifter because she knows that she's grifting. Hey, thank you for the follow. She knows that she's grifting, so if she says she's grifting, people are less likely to think she's grifting, right? I don't know whether it's she's just she's playing like 5D chess with us or not. But either way, Hunter is having a lot of fun, showing her about why things are. People are a product of systems, and issues are a product of systems, and it's not just black culture that causes the issues of the black community, or that maybe there is a cultural element. That's what he's saying now, but that is a product of material reality. Yeah, it's oh my god, it's been a delight so far. You're in for a treat, guys.
Irony of a white man telling me these things.
No, you're invoking identity politics. You're invoking identity politics right now.
Telling me that's not true.
It doesn't matter. But this is what you're doing is the equivalent of someone telling me I can't have an opinion because I'm white.
I did not say that.
You're saying that it's ironic that I'm white telling a black person about something. You're invoking identity politics right now.
Okay. In any case, your argument is that because of all of these systems, these things are in place. This is why it is affecting black people disproportionately. But also, you did say that this type of thing, in order to fix it, has to do with being in the home. It starts in the home, right? Is that what you were saying earlier?
Well, when it comes to personal responsibility, that's something that needs to be fixed within the home. But when we're actually talking about opportunity, and these communities largely lack opportunity, we're talking about policies like investing money to try to build up businesses. A rough idea I thought of is like incentivizing businesses to establish there. Trump actually, unfortunately, it didn't quite work out as well as it could have, but Trump, credit to him, he had a really good idea called, I think they were called, there were opportunity zones, where he was incentivizing businesses that could go in these black communities. And although it ended up not quite working out how it was supposed to, the idea was 100% there. So there are policies that we can take to fix these issues on a broad sense, and then there's an individual way that we can fix these issues within the family. But the government and policy, that doesn't really mesh with the family very often. Usually it's the government trying to make like a broader policy, right, to affect large groups of people.
I just don't understand how you're expecting that something, if you're saying that, I believe personal responsibility is like the tip top, like the creme de la creme of something that someone would need to succeed in life. And if that is not being taught in the home, I don't think there is any policy, no movement, no nothing that will be able to force someone in order to have that personal responsibility until you actually address the problem.
But the thing is that when you do things on a systemic level, maybe it won't affect every single household in some, like, it's not a binary choice in which either all the households are affected by some kind of systemic level, which changes the way in which these communities operate. If you, say, for example, institute better welfare programs that specifically affect rundown black communities that are in such a way because of the way in which property taxes fund schools, which was the point Hunter was making earlier. It's just, if you have... People make individual choices, but you can influence people's individual choices through systemic means on a general level, and then you quantify the data and you look at what happens empirically when you introduce these policies, and wouldn't you know, things actually get better, right? So, like, the idea that we can just wait for people to do things of their own volition without instituting policy to make it easier for them to do so. It's just this peak just world fallacy nonsense that conservatives just keep getting caught up in, rather than looking at the bigger picture of the way in which we can influence things systemically to make society better for everybody.
My frustration, to make it very clear, comes from when I deal with people who does not have that real life experience, and I have seen these things growing up and telling me that this is something that can be fixed on a societal level or on a system level, when I know that some people simply don't have that ability to self-reflect or use personal responsibility.
Okay.
And
Some people don't. Fine. We're not talking about just these individual people. We're talking about the level to which that we can affect it systemically to make the chance, the likelihood, the ease with which somebody can engage in doing in some level of personal responsibility to make that easier systemically overall. Like, it's not, again, as I just said before, it's not a binary choice. It's not, if you, on a micro level, I understand why Gothix would think this, but she's not looking at the macro level with regards to these issues.
you're making it more difficult.
Well, the couple things is when you invoke your lived experience, again, that is by definition
Hey,
identity
Ricky.
politics. It's not bad if you want to bring in identity politics, but you should just admit that it's identity politics.
What are you basing your position on?
What do you mean?
If
So
my lived experience as a black woman, and what
I don't
say
base
to
my
you
stuff
about
on
Black American culture, what are you basing your positions on?
I don't need to base it anything on my like personal experience. Rather, I'm able to base it on looking at like from a policy level. Again, I'm not trying to tell black people that they need to just go like do better or whatever. I'm talking about broad policy again. So I want to lay out an example for you. So I agree that having the drive to go out and work for what like the best outcome you can get in this life is absolutely important, and that is a value that should be instilled in the home. But let me lay out a scenario. Let's say in the home there's the mom and the dad, and they instill these values that say you need to work really hard, you need to do as best you possibly can, okay? And then their child goes out, and maybe they're living in one of these poor communities, and then you know what would happen? They go and apply for a job. And you know what? If they have a black sounding name, I'm sure you've heard this study brought up repeatedly, it's come up multiple times, it's been replicated a couple of times too, black sounding names are less likely to get callbacks when they apply for jobs. So that right there is a way that bias can affect black people, even if they are working, like you said, taking personal experience, taking personal responsibility, doing the absolute best thing they can possibly do. They could still run into roadblocks outside of their control due to systemic racism. Again, it's not a dichotomy. Rather, it's just work as hard as you can, and let's also address some of these systemic inequalities.
I don't believe that someone is doing the best as they can if they stop at my name sounded like an ethnic name and I didn't get a job.
That wasn't how it was done. That wasn't how. So that would have been invoked. First of all,
I'm going to lose my mind. I'm actually gonna Roblox myself. And just like, she thinks that it's some people going, well, clearly the only reason I got this job was because on my individual level, my name must have stopped me from doing so. Well, no, these are studies. These are things where they plan for these things. They look at the confounds the variables that change in these instances, and they measure these based on statistics. It's not just some person thinking that they didn't get the job. Right. Okay, cool. No justice. Let's watch the rest of this video.
Well, you shouldn't shit on that because that would have been using a personal experience, and that's what you just tried to use on me.
If you
Second
let me finish, I'd be able to finish my argument.
Well, okay.
Thank you so much. This is going great.
No, the snark isn't really helping, but it's okay.
You know what? It's that Puerto Rican and Cape Verdean. I just got to use my identity politics when I can. It is what it is.
Okay.
So I fucking had a brain fart.
We were talking about the call thing, and your chat said this.
Can I step in?
Well, yes, just really quick, I wanted to address, someone said that study was done like a decade ago. Two really quick things. One, you're right, it was done a decade ago, and then it was replicated again, and then again. So it's been done actually 3 different times. Second of all, it wasn't just one experience or whatever. It was actually a controlled study where they sent out resumes that were identical, and the only thing that was different was a black-sounding name, and the black-sounding names were significantly less likely to get a callback. People are saying I sound like a racist. Again, we're pulling the Hunter's talking about stats that makes him racist card. Not sure what the point of that is, but again, I just wanted to address that really quickly.
Hold on, I remember. Hold on, San. I just remembered what I was gonna say. Okay, so okay, back to the black sounding name. My point that I was making is that I often hear that as an argument about black people being disproportionately whatever. I look at that as an excuse. If we're talking about pulling up your bootstraps and persevering and overcoming adversity, my first thought is, why the hell would anyone want to work for a job that wanted to discriminate because of your name anyway? And
they shouldn't be, though.
Also, I would even go as far as saying there's other jobs out there. There's other things to do. A common argument that I hear, for example, on the topic of, if we think about hate speech, for example, what if somebody's working for a racist job? Why the hell would you want to work for a racist boss anyway?
Well,
There's
there are
no
laws
similarities.
against that. Like, yeah, you definitely
It doesn't
shouldn't
matter
be,
if there's
but
laws against it. My point being, having the choice to make your choice in life. I didn't say that life was going to be easy or nice and everyone's not going to be mean to one another. I said that is the reality, that people will always be mean to
don't
one
you?
another.
Well, yeah, but don't
And
you think it's lame that people are not able to?
it is lame.
Isn't it
It is
lame that
lame.
people, if they're cursed with a black-sounding name, they're suddenly like less likely to get hired in certain aspects? Like that's
Yeah,
a way.
that sucks.
But that's a way. So that's a way that black people are specifically disadvantaged compared to white people. That would be systemic racism. You're conceding my point right now.
That sucks. That sucks. How bad do you want the job?
Okay, so then you're just living in.
I'm going to Minecraft. Sorry. Just like, it's just this like brain poison that these like people who call themselves classical liberals engage in, where everything is just, well, clearly you don't want the job enough if you have to let these things get in the way of you. And it's like, well, we're not talking about what people's individual choices should or shouldn't be. People are going to make those choices regardless. We can try and influence them to make the best choices that we can, and we do. Like, the left don't just say, well, if there's a systemic barrier, you should just lie down and rot. That's not a thing that we do. But what's really important is that we are looking at this from a general societal lens overall, where we think that a society is better, where we don't have crime, we don't have impoverishment, and people are more likely to get jobs. Sure, maybe you don't want to work for someone who is racist, but maybe we should be taking steps to ameliorate these issues so that it is easier for black people to get jobs in these instances, for poverty to decrease, and therefore to crime rates to decrease, making the society better for everybody. Like, just to try and break it down to this individualist level, it just it's just, I mean, to be fair, it's just a pivot. It's a pivot away from Hunter's argument, because she knows she can't win on this basis, because she knows that all the empiricism is just completely against her in this particular regard. So she has to pivot away from it and just talk about, well, if we actually look back at some individual person doing a thing, and I'm like, well, that's not what we care about.
Denial again, which
How
is
bad do you
so
want-
so you
No,
realize what
it's
you're
a
saying,
valid
which is no
point.
matter what happens, it's just on
How
them
bad
to
do
do
you want
better.
the
It's
job?
just on them to do better no matter what, which is unrealistic ultimately when we're talking about broad systems. I already conceded that they should do as well as they can, but if you're being discriminated against simply because your name sounds ethnic or whatever, that is absolutely a way that black people are disadvantaged compared to white people, and that would be systemic racism. Correlation doesn't equal causation. I never said it did, but again, there was a significant decrease there. It was far more than just correlation.
All I'm saying is that systemic racism or not, this conversation, the semantics of what is occurring in society, the systemic racism, because I
Actually, I'm just going to pause that right there. So I'm going to rewind it very, very slightly. In that, someone in the chat saying that correlation isn't causation, but if you're controlling for variables, right? If you're doing a study where the only variable you're controlling for is the black sounding name, then that is the causation. You're not looking at random correlations with something that confounds the thing that's happening there. You're controlling the variables such that you can isolate them to the point where you can prove causation. That's how studies work.
Correlation doesn't equal causation. I never said it did, but again, there was a significant decrease there. It was far more than just correlation.
all I'm saying is that systemic racism or not, this conversation, the semantics of what is occurring in society, the systemic racism, because I just put it bluntly, how bad do they want the job?
But they're
My
not
mom
even getting
came to this
interviewed.
country when she was really young.
But they're
she
not
had
getting-
multiple jobs, single parent, probably dealt with a lot of bullshit, and somehow she was able to make it. So how bad do you
But
want
it doesn't
the job?
matter because they're not even
It's
getting
just another anecdote. It's just she's just like the black female Tim Pool. That's literally all she is.
interviewed. They're not getting called in even initially. No, because they have an ethnic sounding name. That's what I just
Oh, yeah,
said.
all of the interviews, they couldn't get any of
Is
them?
that what I said? Is all of them? I'm talking
just
about
said they can't get
disproportionate. I'm talking about disproportionate. A disproportionate way that black people are negatively affected. If they're unable to even get a call in to do an initial interview, you can't use the how bad do you want the job thing.
With all due respect, you're making black people sound very disabled right now.
You
and
are.
I'm
You're the
very
one. No,
offended
you
by
are.
that.
You realize
I'm
that?
trying
No.
to
I'm
help
saying
black
that.
people,
No,
boo-boo.
because
That
I'm
makes
actually saying that there are
excuses for 'em.
systems in place that are disadvantaging black people, and you're saying, well, it's true that black people are disproportionately in these negative circumstances, but that's because they're just fucked up. That's what you're saying right now.
No, I did not say that. I said, let's go with it. If you think this is the reality, if your reality is black people are disproportionately have a disadvantage, what now? That is the point that I'm trying to
I told
make.
you.
What now?
First, we need to come to an agreement.
We influence public policy to make it so that we increase the likelihood of people getting out of the poverty trap, especially black communities. It's very, very simple. You have a systemic issue, it requires a systemic solution. If you just sit around and wait for people to just individually pull up by their bootstraps, all that's going to happen is that society is going to deteriorate. If you don't give them that push, then you're just going to have a crappy society. Like, this is why public policy is a thing that we do.
And that's actually a reality. And so far, we're not even able to get past that point.
Sure. Next.
Okay, great. So then we need to actually start looking at policy. So for example, Joe Biden's doing something I really agree with, which is investing $2.5 billion into a specific black community that was torn apart by a highway that was installed. This is a good example of systemic racism where, again, this was not anything that was intended to fuck over black people. It was just putting up a highway. But in doing so, they disproportionately negatively impacted black people, which makes it a system negatively impacting black people. That is systemic racism. And the way that we fix that...
But the individual hiring managers not calling back ethnic sounding names is not a system, but a general trend in which hiring managers on the whole are less likely to call back ethnic sounding names, that is a system, okay?
Is to further invest in those communities. Again, provide jobs, provide
Can you
businesses.
give me a more general, something more general? Because that affects a very small percentage. I don't know how many people live near that bridge. So,
well, yeah, again, it's kind of the idea of investing in these communities and not just throwing money at them, not just giving everybody money, but rather investing in these communities like I brought up.
I mean, I'd give everybody money. Giving everybody money does work. Like, you look at UBI, and there's pilot schemes that have shown that makes people more likely to be able to engage in their own self-betterment. Like, UBI is shown to do that. Again, I have my misgivings with it as a policy in general, but who am I to argue with the results of, with empirical results, right?
Incentivizing businesses to actually go in these communities, which would provide jobs. I mean, I'm not a policymaker, so I have like some broad ideas and understandings of how we can ameliorate these flaws. But again, it's going to really come down to, first and foremost, we have to be willing to agree that this problem even exists.
Okay, you didn't really give me any examples. I'm just going to say that. And I would hope that you would have those examples prepared. If you're telling me that my anecdotal evidence of my lived experiences don't mean anything, and you're telling me that we need to start changing things on a policy level, and you give me an example about some bridge somewhere.
It was a highway, and it was a specific example of where a policy was implemented that went right along the line of what I was advocating for in the broader community. That was a complete and total direct answer to your question.
Okay, and you're talking about going into these communities and investing. You're saying not to throw money at them, but investing, and you don't really know what that looks like. And the only thing that I can really go, I mean, that's what you're saying. You're not familiar with policies. You're saying go back into these communities and invest. But what is that going to do if we're not teaching people personal responsibility, like you said?
Again, we can also do that, but you asked me for a policy, and I already told you there's not going to be a personal responsibility policy. Another policy we could work on too is getting rid of the drug war, so we could decriminalize drugs.
Okay, we can decriminalize drugs, okay, but that's not going to stop people from taking the drugs. That's not.
I know it's not, but it's going to stop people getting arrested for taking the drugs, which is going to stop tearing up communities partially. And then also what that would do is it would cut out the need for gangs and drug cartels, which oftentimes, again, infiltrates these black communities since they're already disproportionately poor and more adversarial with the police. So there's various different policies that we can look at. I just gave you two, though, off the top of my head, so I don't think it's fair for you to say that I don't have any policy.
But Grumpelstiltskin, as I was saying before, that's why studies control for variables. In the studies that were done with regards to people getting called back, the only change in the resumes that were done were by changing the name so that they were sounded like they were non-white. Right? This was the controlled variable. This is how that. Do you see what I mean? Like, if you control for all the other variables, there's no other confound in there to be able to say that it was something other than the difference in the sounding name. Like, sure, maybe it's just so happened that the resumes with the black names were all sent out, or the non-white sounding names were all sent out to the racist ones. They just happened to come across it, right? But if you do it enough times, if you have a large enough data set, if you use a large enough data set, then you can essentially statistically negate the idea of there being some kind of other bias with regards to that, where just the sample size wasn't large enough to give us an even spread of results to be able to reliably come to the conclusion that it wasn't due to some random happenstance and was a systemic issue, a systemic effect based on the change of name on the resume.
Okay, oh, that was good. Thank you, Hunter. Thank you. I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Okay. Well, yeah. There was someone else in the comments that said something I wanted to, oh yeah, that racism requires intent. No, it doesn't. That's why we differentiate between personal, interpersonal racism and systemic racism. So again, the way I define systemic racism is a system that negatively impacts a racial group disproportionately. So you could even argue that the welfare state is systemic racism because it wasn't supposed to be racist, but it it negatively impacted the black community. So that would be an example of quote unquote systemic racism from the Democrat side.
Okay. All right.
Can I
It's
talk to
fine.
Stars, Don, really quickly? Just
Yeah, you can talk. You guys want
I love how the only point you didn't push back on was him saying that the Democrats were bad. I find that very amusing.
to duke it out? You want to get on here, Starsen? Do your thing?
Because, yeah, the main thing I had, Hunter, when you asked about snarkiness earlier.
it wasn't. You said I was
If-
emotional. That's what I wanted to ask you.
Yes,
how
but I'm
emotional.
gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to that with this point right here. You came into that debate ready to attack Gothix. Whether you want to admit it or not, that was your aim. The first thing you did was talk down to her, demean her,
Where?
and then misquote something in the debate. I'm going to get there. You have a habit of interrupting. Please do not. Here's what I will tell you. I looked up the information you gave. You gave wrong information on both. You played semantics, and you cherry-picked the information.
Which info?
The Mr. Potato Head, she was
I think it's her producer or something. I don't know. It's just somebody else in the call who's not on camera.
correct. Earlier in the day, and I put them on there. You can go look. CNN and BBC both reported on it. Hasbro said point blank in the beginning they were getting rid of Mr. and Misser. That was their thing. Mr. and Mrs. were going away for a more gender neutral. I provided screenshots and I provided the links on the initial tweet where she first saw you tweet about her. So that's the first.
That
thing.
wait. So wait. I need to respond to
I'm
this.
not done yet.
Please,
I'm
I need
not
to
done yet.
because
You have to wait. I know you're biting at the chomp, but you gotta wait. Here's what I would tell you. Later in the day, after they saw the whole backlash of where the money was going to come from, they were like, hold on, guys. It's just the umbrella. We're not getting rid of Mr. and Mrs. The first initial thing they told everyone was, yeah, we're getting rid of it. We want everyone to be their most authentic self. We're going to have empty spuds with just 42 accessories, and that's how it's going to be.
Is that what they
And
said?
then afterwards, that is what they said. That is a direct quote from CNN. I have it up on there, and I can even put that little thing right up on here if you'd like.
So then it was
And
Gothix having old information, right? So
it was. That's what I.
I mean,
just
I'm
said.
reading
That's
right here that
semantics.
they no, because what they wanted to do is
Yes.
it is becoming quote unquote gender neutral, I guess, if you want to say that. But they
Yeah,
still
that's what
kept
she
the
said.
Mr. and
And you said
Mrs.
she was wrong.
No, because
Yeah,
she
they
wait.
kept it because
She
it
did
was
not.
monetarily fun.
No, because she didn't just say, oh well, they were changing this and that was it. It was that she said this was some queer theory or some like indoctrination of children.
So, Grandpa Stiltskin, I think the studies show that the problem does exist and is tangible because it negatively affects the black community. I think that trying to ameliorate this issue through public policy is very difficult. You have to have a societal change to make people less averse to non-white sounding names and non-white culture in general. But from a systemic level, if you understand that people are more likely to be unemployed if they are non-white, then you can implement social welfare programs to make sure that, so that means if you are precluded from the job market because of racist hiring practices, you don't end up in poverty, which ends up in more cyclical crime, etc., etc. So that would be a policy which would be able to ameliorate that issue somewhat without actually tackling like the main issue, which I think would be difficult to address with public policy.
Children, and that also
And what
was
would you
wrong.
call gender neutral if not part of queer theory?
It's not indoctrinating children.
Okay, it is when you start giving it as children's toys.
Well,
That is
it's
the literal
not because it's
definition of
named Mr.
indoctrination.
Potato Head and they kept the Mr. and Mrs. So
They did not until they.
But then it's not indoctrinating children if you remove the gender and give them the freedom to do what they want with it. The indoctrination is actually is making it so that the performative gender is what they received. They are being indoctrinated into the idea that a certain gender is performed a certain way. By removing that from them and then presenting it to them in a neutral fashion, that is the opposite of indoctrination, because then they project their internal stuff onto it rather than having it dictated to them by some societal standard of what gender presentation should or shouldn't look like with regards to Mr. or Mrs., right? That's the opposite of indoctrination.
Realized the money wouldn't be there. And so that is my first point. The second point is you misrepresented the Dr. Seuss incident. That actually initially started in 2017 when Melania Trump donated a mural to a library. And the librarian on staff looked the mural, I will admit, identified a few negligible things, and they were very racist for the time frame of now, but not when they came out.
well,
And
sure, yeah.
Yes, and then nothing was said about it, even though the company made no notice until it was financially good for them to do. So that's my point. It's
Wait.
not that they initially realized it once the Asian hate came out. They were brought up about it 4 years prior. And
I know,
it was
so I'm aware that
tangible,
the
not
books
just
had
words.
controversy like surrounding them at times, sure, but
Mhm.
Gothic's claim was that there was this mob that came out and then they changed it under pressure, and that is not what happened. There was
And
not
what
a,
it
there
was
was hold on, there
online
was
backlash.
there was some controversy and backlash maybe at some point or another. But again, you said it initially started in 2017. There wasn't a lot of backlash, and then they changed it 3 years later. How is this mob like that? How is this
Because what
mob
she was
cancel
talking
culture?
about was that one online. Whether it's a small mob or a large mob, you wanted her to identify a mob that you wanted her to pick up
No,
individual tweets. Yes,
No,
and my
I'm
point is
not. I
this,
think that we're
Hunter.
missing each other here because that is not what I was asking her to do. She said that there was a mob that caused this to happen, and that was a result of cancel culture. And I was simply saying that's not the case. Maybe the books were controversial at a time. Of course, they did contain outdated imagery, but they said, the company, the foundation, deliberately said that they consulted experts and teachers, and that's when they made the decision. And this just happened.
Yes, it happened, and your claim was they did it directly in relation to Asian hate. No, they waited till it was most profitable to do it. And my point is, Hunter,
How
the
do you
point
know
I'm getting
that?
at,
How do you know that they waited till
because
it's most
it's
profitable?
You just look at
because it's clearly obvious. And my point is this: they came into the debate
Saying that it's clearly obvious is not a rebuttal of the point that Hunter's made there. And in general, if you look at and the general trend of societal progressivism, the time with it is most beneficial for people to engage with a progressive platform from a financial perspective, that's only going to get stronger over time. So, like, when that kind of point of inflection comes where they do bite the bullet and then they remove their kind of slightly more problematic elements from their branding or whatever, that's going to happen in general as the course of time. Like, we think, well, there's such like a thing about being progressive at the moment, right? With regard, that's why Dr. Seuss said it. Well, like, of course, it was going to be that moment because that's when they got to the tipping point. So then they could get more progressive from here.
overarching generalized themes about cultural appropriation, and you hyper focused on two small issues, and
You can't get
focused
mad
on
at me
that
for
in
going on missing.
yes, I can. When your entire purpose is to try to make her look stupid and you couldn't even quote it right.
Okay,
That
first
is
of
my
all, I
point.
did quote it. I read both the articles during the debate, and I just read it to you also. Second of all,
You read
I
that
didn't
there
get a
was
chance
never
to.
a point where it happened. There was never a point where it was gender neutral, and you even said she was wrong on it. So I
I
want
said
to
that she
make
was
clear
wrong
she
about
was
it
not.
indoctrinating kids and being queer theory, and that it was actually they just got rid of the umbrella name Mr. Potato Head. It became neutral or whatever, and then they had a Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. And also, there was another thing also I wanted to mention too that Gothix said, because Gothix mentioned that you wouldn't be a problem if they got rid of a book that was from the 50s that no one was really buying anymore. But that was literally then what you made the argument with the Dr. Seuss thing.
I never said that. I never
You
said
said
And also, something being gender neutral doesn't make it queer theory. Like, was it queer theory when you just had, like, bits and pieces of Lego Man in your boxes of Lego, and you got to put the different heads and hats and different pieces of clothing into the Lego men? That wasn't queer theory just because it was gender neutral. Like, that's not what that means.
if they
Not the one that
canceled.
brought up Dr.
no,
Seuss.
no, no.
No, no,
I said
you
that
said
that
if they,
book had not been purchased. I don't think any book.
you said if they
in
canceled a
terms
book
of
that was from the
canceled-
40s that no one was reading, that wouldn't really be that big of a deal. And then you told me that the Dr. Seuss books didn't have any sales.
That's not what I said. I said my point that I was trying to make is, again, I don't care about the semantics, what the reason was of why they got rid of it. I'm looking at the cause and the consequence, what happened as a result, and how it connects to everything else. That's why I said it has to do with indoctrination, and to you would have to take that initiative to want to know, what do I mean by that, and how is this all correlated. But my point that I'm trying to make is that thing with the Mr. Potato Head and all that stuff, I don't care about what's happening. I just care about, like, the obvious patterns, like why is it happening. And
Well, because
I
you're
mean,
trying to make it into this like Marxist big like overarching thing about how
that's the
there's like the
thing.
Marxisms entwined
But
to everything or
Hunter,
whatever. But
how much do you honestly, and I'm not trying to be mean, I'm not trying to be condescending, how much do you know about Marxism? Like,
not very
how
much. I don't follow
okay,
Marxism,
then
but
how
also
can
I
you
reject the
say
idea that
how
everything
can
that
you
like
say
gender
without
neutral.
educating yourself that this
Because
is
I don't
false?
need to be educated on Marxism to recognize that anti-racism and accepting LGBT people is not a Marxist thing. But anyway, I mean, I thought that I just wanted to ask. I thought that you wanted for personally, I thought that you wanted to wrap this conversation up. I'm fine if
I
you want to
do.
keep on talking, but I just wanted to
have
know from
go to
Star
Best
Stan
Buy, but I
how.
wanted to come to a middle ground, but I don't think we're gonna do that.
Well, I mean, yeah, your chat's accusing me of pushing agendas on children. Again, telling kids the
No, they're
truth
still
and the
pulling
facts
queer
about
theory.
like gender and sex,
If you wanna have a-
like at an appropriate age
Okay.
is not a bad thing. It's not indoctrination. Not indoctrination. So.
Okay, anti-racism is racist. read what's in anti-racism. It is
Holy shit! Is she doing like? Is she continuing with the anti-racism is anti-white meme? Is she doing that? Is she feeling like there's still a pandemic? You got to keep your mask on, mate.
unbelievably racist, and it's so unbelievably divisive, and it's I know that you're doing things out of the kindness of your heart. I know you are trying to be a good person. I do not believe you're just a jerk on YouTube. I refuse to believe that. But what I'm telling you is that you are not in a position to say that this is false when I'm responding about Marxism, when you do not fully grasp what Marxism is.
I don't need to fully grasp what Marxism is to have conversations about systemic racism or LGBT acceptance. No, because when you come on here and say things like, oh, the Mr. Potato thing is a Marxist tactic, that just sounds like a fucking delusion at that point, honestly. But either way, I appreciate the conversation. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to a more common ground.
I wonder how much Marxism Gothix even knows about, or is it just stuff that she kind of gleaned from watching too much James Lindsay or Christopher Rufo, listening to their bullshit talking points.
Also, thanks Starson for the convo. Sorry that I've apparently become super emotional by consistently citing studies, but either way, yeah, I guess have a good rest of your time, guys.
You too, Hunter.
I'm gonna go talk to Karl Marx. See you.
All right, have fun.
I really want to know why she thinks, I genuinely want to have a conversation with her, and I wonder how much she knows about Marxism, so that I can understand why she thinks that Mr. Potato Head is Marxist. Or Potato Head, I guess, is rather the term. Or this is just like hypercopium from people trying to rationalise, like, hating something completely innocuous to be able to drive culture war nonsense. I have no idea. But yeah, I think Hunter really did. I think Hunter did really well in that debate. I've been really impressed recently with the level of prowess that he comes into these debates. Maybe he should educate him on Marxism so that he can win these debates in the future moving forward, and then also maybe become one as well. But yeah, I think that he came across really well. He cited studies. Like, he should have pushed back harder on the difference between solving things on a systemic level and solving things on an interpersonal level, because I think it's really difficult to try and because every time you try and move it away from systemic issues, conservatives will keep bringing it back. So being about some kind of individualist, neoliberal kind of paradigm, you have to shift them away from that. Otherwise, you just end up getting caught lost in the weeds responding to random anecdotes. You just have to go, that's an anecdote, that's not data, let's look at the data, and then just complete and just not get caught up in that kind of trap that they put you in. These kind of thought terminations. How's everyone doing in chat? How was the Chud stream? Was he still going over the aristocracy, the drama stream that Aristocracy did? I missed all of that drama. Was it good? I hope so. I'm trying to wonder if there's anything in particular that I had on for today that I was going to look at. Because I've got 36 people watching. Might as well make the most of it. Speaking of 36 people watching, if you are enjoying what you're watching, if you are tolerating what you're watching, please, if you're watching on Twitch, I invite you to click the follow button. It would help me out a great deal. Or subscribe to me on the YouTube of the YouTubes. I would also appreciate that too. You can follow me on Twitter my @ is the same as my Twitter handle. My Twitter handle, sorry, is the same as my Twitch handle as well. So I would much appreciate that. And I thank you for sticking around on the stream today. Let's just have a look at something to go over. I didn't have much planned other than this, really. Oh, I know what I'm going to talk about. I was going to do it as part of a normal island segment, but then I had to cancel it for personal reasons. So let's talk about what's been happening at something that I know that's close to plenty of people's hearts, which is Yorkshire County Cricket Club. Now, they've been embroiled in a racism scandal in which a player named Azim Rafiq said that he thought that there was institutional racism going on within the cricket club because he is from Pakistani origin, and they were using the P slur against him. And Yorkshire did an internal report on this, but they refused to release it at the time. Oh, racism in sports! I'm so surprised. The thing is in the UK, a large portion of the people who play cricket are people from the Indian subcontinent, there is a very, very large ethnic minority contingent within cricket playing communities within the country, right? So, I mean, and usually what you see when people have high levels of integration is that there's not that much racism going on. So I was very surprised by this. So things have been kind of popping off. So we'll go back as far as we can. This was back in September. This originally popped off. So Yorkshire admit Azim Rafiq suffered from racial harassment whilst at the club. Thank you for the follow. That's much appreciated, American Patriot. Yorkshire admit Azim Rafiq suffered from racial harassment whilst at the club, but refused to release the report. So the allegation of racism at the club, they were unable to publish it in relation to privacy law and defamation following parliamentary pressure to release the findings. So this has been so much of a scandal. It's reached Parliament. Like, even Sajid Javid was tweeting about it, for fuck's sake. Like, this is big stuff. Now, this was the original thing that went on with regards to the racism issue. The club issued an apology, said he'd been the victim of inappropriate behaviour, but they didn't say there was any kind of institutional racism issue that was going on at the time. Like, you even see, like, Rafiq was on the brink of suicide after experiencing racism. It was pretty bad in that clearly it was what was happening was within kind of the club culture, this kind of casual racial prejudice had been normalised, which made it difficult for people, not just Azim Rafiq, but there was also Ahmad Shahzad, and there was also I forget the name of the other player, but he was also I think it was Pakistani as well, or Bangladeshi, being victims of racism at the same time, and Rafiq brought this to light. A spokesperson for Rafiq criticised Yorkshire's atrocious handling of the investigation and said failure to hand over a copy of the report was an abusive process. We note that Yorkshire County Cricket Club has confirmed Azim Rafiq was the victim of racism and bullying during the 2 spells at Headingley. However, we must highlight the atrocious way this process continues to be handled. Azim was not given any notice of this morning's statement. He had received a copy only a couple of minutes before the media, which is wild considering that considering that he is at the kind of centre of these allegations that are going on. Now, this was quite a while back, and they refused to admit it. So, fast forward to the news that broke, the actual report got leaked out, right? And turns out it was being called peace slur, and what they had said in the report at the cricket club was that it was just banter and it was not reasonable for him to be offended, right? So there was what was the tweet from? Did I have the tweet from Sajid Javid saved? I didn't. That's unfortunate. But he essentially quote tweeted George Dobell, who's the person who wrote this article, saying that it was completely it can never be classed as banter, which is amusing that finally Sajid Javid seems to be concerned with the idea of racism when it's not coming from the Prime Minister. Because this is getting referred to the Department for Culture and something else, a parliamentary body, is going over the incident here. And what's happened is the Yorkshire County Cricket Club, they've lost sponsors. They're now not being able to hold test matches for international series anymore, because of all of the issues that have come to light. So this has really kind of caused quite a hubbub within the media at this point. While the investigating team, the lawyers who were charged with the gathering evidence report, found such comments to be capable of creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment, and accepted Rafiq's evidence that he was offended, degraded, or humiliated, and this amounted to harassment under the Equality Act and the club's equal opportunities policy, the panel who were charged with making conclusions and recommendations, and which included a non-executive member of the Yorkshire board, had disagreed. So all of the people with the actual knowledge of the issue at hand, and with regards to what had gone on within the incident, had given the recommendation that this was against the Equality Act and was tantamount to harassment. The board who was investigating, who were part of Yorkshire at this point, essentially just said, well, we've investigated ourselves, and we didn't think we did anything wrong. Sorry. It's very Owen Paterson, isn't it? The panel does not accept that Azim was offended by the other player's comments, either at the time or they were made subsequently. Now, what has happened is that it came out that it was actually Gary Balance who had admitted to doing the phrase, and he thought that it was in jest because they'd called him Zimbo because he's from Zimbabwe. The nickname Rafiq was understood to have used for Balance. It's literally the American copy, isn't it? Like, turns out when we went back over our behaviour, we've decided that nothing's gone wrong here. So it's been wheels within wheels the whole time, which is, considering this has been going on for quite a long time now, is pretty extraordinary. I don't understand why Yorkshire won't just take the L on this one and just say, yeah, there was systemic racism, let's pay out some remunerations to Azim Rafiq in this instance, and let's just get over it and try and create a better culture moving forward. Yet they've just kind of dug their heels in so far that now the government's getting involved. That doesn't seem like a good idea to me, to be honest. Balance claimed that they supported each other greatly through the highs and lows of their respective careers, adding that I was there for him. Blah 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 blah. Wherein Rafiq said he lost faith in humanity after the tragic death of his infant son. Wow, Jesus Christ, this guy's been through the wars, hasn't he? Let's have a look. What else there was? With regards to this issue. Nike cancel kit sponsorship. York suspended hosting international cricket. Loses title sponsor. Yeah. Jesus, Michael Vaughan got involved. Fucking hell. Admits involvement in a Rafiq report. Denies racist comments. Hey, thank you for the follow of Avallone Island. It's much appreciated. He's the former player implicated in the investigation of the allegations of institutional racism. In his final season of the club, he had told Rafiq and two other Asian players that there are too many of you lot. We need to do something about it. Jesus, fuck, blimey. They were taking the field during a match against Nottingham in 2009, where Rafiq's maiden. Jesus, imagine starting your first season and someone saying, "Yeah, there's too many people. There's too many Muslims, too many brown people in the cricket club." Fucking hell. I love it, Mizumi. Jesus. Been involved for 30 years, never once been accused of anything remotely similar incident or disciplinary offence as a player or commentator. I completely categorically deny that I've said those words. I responded to the panel by saying it was gobsmacked. It was 11 years after the alleged incident, and nothing at all was raised at the time of the game in question, or at any stage of the next 11 years until the night before I was asked to speak at the inquiry. Well, to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if he literally just said it and didn't remember. But also, if it was that long ago, you can just admit to it and just say, maybe if I did say those claims, I apologise, right? It's like, 2009 was a long time ago. 2009, like, the way in which we were looking at, like, kind of racial divides and kind of racial politics in this country was way different to us. There's been substantial changes only in a singular decade to make our kind of societal consciousness be a little bit more cognizant of the way in which racism is pervasive. Like, I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that even someone like Michael Vaughan might at some point have gone, okay, maybe the things that I was saying were bad, and change his attitude towards Asian people. Maybe he did have some kind of subconscious bias in the past. Like, people can change. Like, it's okay to admit that you used to be racist and are not now. Like, we should be encouraging people to admit that and also grow as a person. Otherwise, how are we ever going to create or engender a society in which people who hold racist views feel okay changing if we don't give them any reason to do so by accepting the apology and accepting them being non-racist now? Otherwise, people they're going to be incentivized to stay within the communities that accept that behavior and reward that behavior by not pushing back. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not giving him the space with which to come out and say, sure, maybe I did make those comments. If I did, they were wrong. I don't believe that thing. Like, it's not the first racism scandal we've had in cricket this year either. There was also Ollie Robinson. Like, they found tweets from 7 years ago saying some racist stuff, and I'm like, 7 years ago, mate. That's not relevant now with who you are as a person now. Sure, but if we're doing an overall investigation into whether the actual cricket club in Yorkshire has some level of institutional racism, being able to admit that it has happened previously, sure, maybe that's going to implicate people at the cricket club in general. But if you want to be able to move past that and create a better atmosphere moving forward, and regain these sponsors, you have a commercial and monetary incentive to want to make the changes that are going to get people back on board with regards to sponsorships and being able to hold test matches and get the government off your back as well. I don't know what's happening with the government report on this. Let's have a look. Yeah, so Sergeant Jarvis culminated in Yorkshire's hierarchy being called before a DCMS select committee hearing on November the 16th, and a bunch of club partners, including kit suppliers, have all severed their ties with the club, yeah. So, Azim Rafiq set to give evidence before DCMS as pressure mounts on Yorkshire. Club comes in for criticism of government have handling report, blah, 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 blah. Department for Culture, Media and Sport. That's what DCMS stands for. Now I remember. Yeah, so no player or future official would face sanctions was what the original report said, against the advice of the lawyers who were part of that process. Got leaked to ESPN Cricinfo. A spokesperson for Boris Johnson said the language against Rafiq was racist and never used in any context whatsoever. I wonder what that Boris Johnson spokesperson thinks about referring to Muslim women as letterboxes. Do they think that's racist? I wonder. Maybe we should ask them. Maybe we should, by any chance, have him be held to account for the egregiously racist shit that he said in the past, but I digress. The chair of the committee called for the entire board of the club to resign. Knight has the power to call all involved to give evidence to a committee of MPs. The conclusions of this panel will be proof hard to ignore. Like, they're kind of snookered on this one, really. I don't see how they get out of this without admitting fault, sending a bunch of people on their way, and then trying to then build back some kind of brand recognition after that. It seems pretty difficult. Well, I do find it incredibly, as I said before, it's very hypocritical that a bunch of Conservative MPs now think that racism is bad, despite the fact that there's so much of it in their own party at this point. But hey ho. Hudson's testimony will also be revealing they didn't join Yorkshire till April 2020, long after the period of which his allegations relate, and retained a relatively good relationship with Rafiq. They originally indicated a desire to see the full report published, but in the face of strong opposition from a couple of his key executives and some legal advice, which suggested to do so would risk liable actions, was eventually persuaded to take a different approach. He is seen by the ECB and some extent Rafiq as a reforming influence at the club and is still thought to want to see the contents of the report published. Well, at least there's somebody there who actually wants to be able to see remunerations happen at this point. Jeez, this must be the Michael Vaughan saying the behaviour amounted to bullying, cleared of serious misconduct as the panel concluded his motivations were not racist. I don't know how saying that there are too many brown people could, in what possible way, be construed as not being racist. I don't know how you can model that around, but I guess not. Jeez, the ECB threatened to prosecute them for bringing the game into disrepute. Jesus. Well, that was... It seems like that's not an ideal situation for them to be in. And I think it's quite sad, really, that even in a sport in which a large contingent of the people who engage in it are people from the subcontinental Asian community in the UK, they still face high levels of racism. I mean, it was interesting. I was getting into with Michael Holding talking about BLM because one of the South African cricketers at the World Cup refused to take the knee, and then because South Africa was saying that everybody on the team should take the knee as part of their the start of the game, he was not allowed to play. So there was a big hubbub about that as well. Although why an Afrikaner would be racist, I have no idea. But hey ho, is what it is. It's just sad, really. It's sad, really, because if anything has if any sport has been driven by non-white cultures around the world, cricket is one of the big ones because it's huge in the Caribbean and huge in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And India are one of the best teams in the world. So it's very kind of sad at this point. But hopefully, with it being investigated by the government, hopefully we'll see some changes. But maybe I shouldn't hold my breath. Hey ho. Let me see what else we've got. There's any good videos we can watch. How's everyone in chat doing? You all having a good day today? You all taking care of yourselves? Let's have a look. Oh, there's an interview between Chelsea Poe and Kate Montgomery talk about the Lily Kate stuff. Maybe that's something to cover tomorrow. Cover some Saga. Saga's pretty funny. Did anybody watch any of the Destiny Infrared debate on Dylan Burns' Hippy Dippy Championship? That Jackson Hinkle moment, was unfathomably cringe. It made me cringe incredibly hard. He's such a loser. It's funny because he acts such a big game, but he's just incredibly insecure, and I find that quite funny. Whereas I don't think Haz is. I think Haz is actually. I genuinely Haz is obviously hilarious. Like the I'd be way more racist than you clip, who's iconic, but Jackson Hinkle is just dollar store infrared at this point. And there's the hilarious moment with the DSA patch, but I digress. I probably should fill this dead air with something. There's still 29 of you. Well, it is quite late though. It is 11 o'clock, and I am quite tired, and I've been streaming for 3 hours now. So maybe I can ship you on to somebody else. I do appreciate you dropping by today. I'll pop my socials in chat for posterity. There we go. Let me find out who we can raid. Wow, geez, no one's bloody live. No one I'm following is live. That's wild. Let me see what we can do. Oh, Dan Simpson is live. Let's go for him. Ooh. What's going on here? Well, apparently raids aren't working today. Oh well. See if someone else I can raid. Come on, Twitch. Function. How about we go for Sonsol. There we go. That's working now. Maybe Dan went offline whilst I was trying to do the raid. Anyway, I appreciate you all for dropping by. I really appreciate a follow if you could. I usually stream on Wednesdays and Sundays, but I pushed my Wednesday stream forward to Thursday today. I'll try to raid a little bit more often, but hopefully we will see each other again at some point in the future. Hopefully I'll get another raid from Chad. We'll see what happens. But again, you all guys take care. Hope you have the rest of the evening, and I will leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Sonsol.